My turn. I looked at her as the computer booted up. "Come on, give it to me," she said, with a smile on her face. "Lucy told me about this site with stories. Maybe we can find some ideas there." "What?" I asked, moving away from the table. "Lucy told me about the site. She said that it greatly enlivened their intimate life." Without answering, I headed to the kitchen. "Coffee?" I shouted. "Yes, please, dear." I prepared 2 cups of instant coffee and returned to the office. "Well, what are you talking about? What website and why do you need it? Do we have problems in bed?" "Everything is fine with us, but you can always learn something new," she answered, taking the cup. "Learn something new? You're kidding. We've already gone further than most. Further than I would ever admit to anyone. In the eyes of others, we probably seem like perverts, and imagine that I wanted something new that we haven't tried yet. Yes, honey, but nothing will happen if you just look." I nodded. "Okay, let's see." I scrolled through the categories. "Look at this. Sex parties, coercion. It's just disgusting. I have no desire whatsoever to read any of this." "And what about this?" she said, clicking the link. A selection of new stories appeared on the screen. She chose the first one. We started reading together. It was a story about a man whose wife cheated on him and humiliated him in the process. "It's just disgusting. Who would tolerate this?" I was indignant. She didn't answer, just opened the next story. Here the plot was similar, but the husband stood up to defend himself, beat his lover, and kicked out his unfaithful wife. "This is closer to reality," I said. "That's how it should be." "Don't you think that if he loved her, he could forgive the little affair?" she asked. "Don't you think that if she loved him, she wouldn't have had this affair?" I retorted. "No, if you get married, then you belong to each other." "Are you saying that you own me?" "Yes, just like you own me. We belong to each other. What if I want to share with you?" "Share me? This means that you must share yourself too. But you used to have threesomes and more before we met." "I know there were." "Yes, before we met. And if you wanted, we could try before the wedding." "Why before and not after? We are married. Why is this so difficult to understand?" "Well, yes, but I thought it could be fun." "It may be fun, but once we cross that line, we won't be married anymore." "What if it's by consent? Even by consent? In my eyes, we will cease to be spouses and become just lovers." "This is stupid. Nothing will change. Nothing but obligations. And then, even a one-time experience will destroy the important foundations of the relationship." "Which ones, for example?" "For starters, honesty and trust, but I can name more." "You're exaggerating." "Really? Let's look at fairness in a hypothetical exchange situation. We spent the night with another couple. Can we honestly admit to each other that it was incredible? Especially if one of us is the first to say it was a terrible experience. So there is no honesty. Would we believe it if someone else said it was mediocre? So there is no trust. And without trust and honesty, jealousy appears. And all this is only getting worse. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe. But I thought our relationship was strong enough to handle it. Until this evening, I thought so too. Her face changed. It seems that my words finally reached her. I stood up and said decisively, "Forget. I don't want to discuss this anymore. If you think I'll do this, you're crazy. But no, you're mine. Only mine. As soon as you cease to be only mine, you will cease to be mine at all." She wanted to object, but I interrupted her. I said no, and it would be better for me not to find out that you have already done something behind my back. This was the end of the conversation. She was clearly upset. It was cold in the bedroom for several days. After a few weeks, our sex life was almost back to normal. One evening, she wanted to try the dominant role again. I've always loved it, but I haven't let her tie me down since that very conversation. "Just light restrictions, dear, like when we first started playing with ropes," she said pleadingly. I don't know what influenced me more, her conviction or my desire to return our relationship to normal, but I agreed. This is how I found myself tied, arms and legs stretched out, at the complete mercy of her game. She skillfully teased me with her touches, playing on the edge of what was permitted. Every time I thought I couldn't take it anymore, she would stop and watch my reaction. Please, I begged once again. She raised her head and looked into my eyes, running her fingers lightly over my skin, enjoying her control and my impatience. Her gaze showed confidence in who was in charge here. How about inviting someone else? After that, she lowered her head again and continued to do her job. I froze. At first I was shocked, and then I was overcome with rage. We have already discussed this. Untie me, I said coldly. She stopped and, looking me straight in the eyes, said, Not until we talk about it. Last time you didn't even listen to me. I was so nervous that I couldn't express my thoughts properly. We have already discussed everything. This will never happen. Now untie me. If you're serious about getting into a relationship with someone else, you can start packing your things right after you untie me. Oh yes, so what would you do if I called someone right now and did it in front of you? She asked defiantly. I looked at her. I have never been so angry in my life. Through clenched teeth, I muttered, Make sure it's someone you don't care about, because after I'm done with him, you'll never see him again. She left me alone. I heard her come downstairs, and then I heard her talking on the phone. And then I felt helpless and scared. What if she actually calls someone? I was tied down and couldn't do anything. Untie me immediately, I shouted when she returned. She started teasing me again, ignoring my words. Enough, stop it now. Free me, I shouted. Damn it, Deborah, Aberystwyth. She didn't react. For God's sake, Deborah, release me immediately. I'm not kidding. Aberystwyth, Aberystwyth, Aberystwyth. You're not serious, she answered calmly. I'm serious. Untie me now, I shouted. My anger reached its peak. We always followed the rules, and one of the main ones was to immediately stop the game after saying a safe word. Suddenly, I heard the doorbell ring. I fell silent. Now I was seized with panic. She left the room. I strained, trying to free myself, but she tied me too well. All my attempts only exhausted me and left me with rope burns. When she returned, I immediately looked to see if she was lonely. Luckily, there was no one behind her. Remove these ropes immediately. This is already going too far, I muttered. Sorry. I thought it would be fun, she whispered, starting to untie me. This might have been fun a couple of months ago, but now, after all your fantasies, I'm not sure I can trust you anymore. Especially after you ignored your safe word. What was that all about, and who was at the door? She looked scared. It was Lucy, she muttered. So you wanted her to sleep with me so you could sleep with some man? Was this your plan? She looked at me, then nodded. That's it, that's enough. We had an amazing sex life until you made us watch this nonsense. Now we're just putting on a show. Hell, I haven't had any normal fun since this whole thing started. I looked at her angrily. Here's another option. I thought I was almost at the top, but everything went wrong, right? You had 5 of these moments last week. Yes, but it wasn't quite what I expected, I replied. And it seems that during all this time you had even less, if any. She didn't answer. We looked at each other for a while until I broke the silence. Do you remember how many years ago we began to experiment, to move away from what was instilled in us as the norm? We had 2 rules: don't tell anyone and don't involve anyone. And now I can't understand what you and Lucy were talking about. In my opinion, your conversations with her have already involved someone else, not to mention your ridiculous plan. So go ahead, tell me. How far have you gone in revealing things about our intimate life? She blushed. I thought it would be normal. She told me so many things about her games with Brian. She collected her thoughts a little and continued. She told me a lot more about her experiences, and they did more extreme things than we did. I stared at her. He and Brian make us look vanilla. First of all, I don't care what they do. I only care about what we do. I noticed you still haven't answered my question. She pursed her lips and looked down. What did you tell her? All. And she did everything we did? She nodded. How can you be sure of this? She told me. Well, of course, she said she wouldn't tell anyone about it, right? She won't say anything. She's told me too much. She won't dare. And what did she tell you that is such a big secret? She lowered her eyes and shook her head. I can't say, I promised. I looked at her with disgust and went downstairs. I poured myself a large glass of rum and looked at my watch. It was already past midnight. When I returned, I asked, why should you keep your promises to her if you can't keep them to me? Damn, you broke two of our cardinal rules because of her. Do you remember what I said about sincerity and trust? Do you remember? I was already screaming. How can I trust you enough now to ever do this again? Sorry, but this is B. Brian. He's a subordinate. I looked at her. What does this have to do with me, with us? It's not like ours. He completely submits. When they are alone, he dresses differently. She, do whatever they want with him. Is that why you ignored everything today and destroyed my trust? What do you mean? She didn't even seem to hear what I said and just continued talking about Brian. He wears unusual clothes, fulfills her requests, and shares food with her. Food left after her. After what? Why is this so terrible? After her meetings with others, she has lovers. I looked at her in disbelief. What? Do you want? Are you expecting? I screamed so hard that I could hardly finish my sentence. I told you that I would never share you with anyone else. Do you want me to do this? Have you completely forgotten? The first time you suggested this, I immediately said, no way. I think it's time for you to stop even thinking about it. I don't understand why you even decided that I would think about this. Lucy. She just said it was so much fun. Even Brian said he really enjoyed it. Lucy said that since you are already such a submissive, you would like it. She said she thinks you want it yourself. You're just embarrassed to admit it. It took me a while to calm down and pull myself together. Well, perhaps Mistress Brianna told him to say it. Or maybe he just wants someone else to do it too, so his own life doesn't seem so screwed up. Have you read these stories about such people? I turned on the computer. Divorce, murder, prison, or suicide is how it usually ends, and sometimes several of these options. So come on, sit down, and I'll show you examples. I went for another glass of rum and a pack of cigarettes. When I returned, she had already opened the site and walked away from the computer. It didn't take me long to open several tabs with similar stories. I noticed that some of them start like this. The wife bullies the husband, he wakes up tied to the bed, and she has sex in front of him. Then her partner tries to force him to do something he doesn't want to do, or she tries to pressure him into agreeing. If someone tried this with me, I would act decisively and prevent it from happening. Or, for example, when someone ignores the word no and tries to force the other person. So, if this happens to me, no one will get what they want, and the situation will end in an extremely unpleasant way. She smiled at me. The damn bitch smiled. Darling, you are 70 meters and weigh only 70 kilograms. What if it's a huge blonde Adonis? I looked into her eyes and realized that she already had someone in mind. Or she's already sleeping with someone. I said quietly, with the most threatening intonation. Now I think you're already sleeping with someone else. And all this nonsense is just a plan to either drag me into what you and this easily accessible woman are up to, or to alleviate your guilt. If that's the case, then you just sign this bastard's sentence, and when you get out of the hospital, you can file for divorce. No, honey, I don't sleep with anyone. I was just interested because of what Lucy was saying. I looked into her eyes. Her look said she was telling the truth, and I believed her, but she wasn't going to get off that easy. Are you sure? You're trying too hard to push me into something I've already said no to. I threw the glass at the wall. It broke, leaving a dent. Maybe you should go to him right now. Have fun a few times until I figure out who this bastard is. I don't sleep with anyone but you. Then you must have someone in mind. You just described him. There is no one. There is no one. This time I saw that she was not telling the truth. Is this one of Lucy's lovers? No one is there. I didn't say anything and went to bed. I lay deep in thought when she came to bed about 10 minutes later. "Are you sleeping?" she asked. I didn't answer. "I didn't cheat on you," she whispered. "I didn't cheat." Bye, I thought. I couldn't sleep for several more hours, and when I finally dozed off, I already knew exactly what to do. In the morning, she looked like she had hardly slept. She apologized and continued to say that she didn't cheat, that it was just a stupid idea. Before leaving, I told her just one phrase, the same as last night. "Is this one of Lucy's lovers?" I headed to work and picked up Jack, my assistant, on the way. When we arrived at the site, the scaffolding was not yet fully installed, so we stayed in the car and had an early breakfast. We watched the scaffolding being installed for about 30 minutes until Jack said, "You're kind of quiet today, boss." "Yeah, just looking at the clouds that are coming. There's probably no point in starting." About 5 minutes later, the first drops of rain fell on the windshield. After another 5 minutes, I could barely make out the workers running for cover. The decision was made. In such weather, it was pointless to dismantle the roof. "Screw it, Jack. Let's wrap up." I took him home and then returned to my place. I thought about calling on Brian, but decided that it was useless without the permission of his mistress. He wouldn't tell me anything anyway. I didn't care which one of them planned to involve Debbie in this, but whoever it was would answer for it, and she would understand how stupid she had been. I hope Lucy also learns the lesson that if her stallions come near me, they will never be the same again. At home, I picked up the mail. All the letters turned out to be advertisements, except one, which was addressed by hand. After reading it, I made a call and then went out for a while. When I returned, I felt much better. Debbie wouldn't be home until 5, so I had time to prepare to get her to talk things through. I felt a little sorry for what was about to happen, but if she had talked to me earlier when her friend started filling her head with nonsense, we wouldn't be in this situation. My preparations included purchasing a bottle of strong Russian vodka and filling a flask with my rum. I poured some rum into a glass, poured it over my neck and face, and then placed the almost empty bottle next to the computer. I loaded the site and opened many tabs with stories of humiliation and betrayal. Debbie was almost an hour late, but the information I had received earlier put my mind at ease. I was sitting at the computer when she walked through the door. "I thought you'd be home when I saw this weather." No explanation, no apology for being late. So, I held out. "Is this one of Lucy's lovers you want to sleep with?" "Why do you keep asking this?" "Because you haven't told me the truth yet." "I told you." "You're lying," I growled. "I should have left weeks ago." "You're drunk. And you are a lying woman of easy virtue. Tomorrow I will sober up, but you will still remain a lying woman of easy virtue." I drained my glass, the first of the evening. My movements were exaggerated and deliberate. "I'm not like that," she cried. I poured myself a normal glass and took a sip. "Well, not long left. You and your friend Lucy, slutty Lucy, ha ha ha. Why is she slutty? You will be too. Slutty Debbie. No, it doesn't sound like that. Oh, I know, a woman of easy virtue Debbie. Yes, that's right. Slutty Lucy and her friend Debbie having sex parties while their husbands wait. Oh, and their pathetic husbands, Joe the Jerk and Brian the Expendable. Prepare them and give them pleasure later." "No, no, that's not what I want." "But that's what you told me. You want me to. What else?" "Shawn." She realized her mistake as soon as the name left her lips. It turned out to be easier than I thought. "So Shawn is one of Lucy's lovers?" "Yes," she sobbed. "A healthy guy?" "Yes." I raised an eyebrow. "That is, he is tall, about 2 meters. Is he just tall or something else?" "No, yes, Lucy said he was. Big." "Have you been in contact with him?" The color drained from her face. We kissed." "This is all?" She said nothing. I said, "Is that all?" louder this time. She looked down. "Why, yes." "Look at me when you speak. Now again, is that all?" "And no. One day he started groping me, but Brian came into the room and I ran home. Then I showered for an hour, feeling dirty. A wife shouldn't behave like that. A good wife doesn't do that. Single women can do this, but they are called girls of easy virtue. Do you want to become single? A woman of easy virtue? She shook her head, tears already streaming down her cheeks. But you still want to go further, I said, realizing that I had slightly missed my drunk way of speaking. I hope she didn't notice. I felt guilty, and Lucy convinced me that if you participate, then everything will be okay. And you too came up with this stupid plan to make you a woman of easy virtue, a cuckold out of me, and only Lucy and her stallions will benefit. Then tears flowed freely from her. Please forgive me. I was stupid. She convinced me it would be a good idea. Have you read any of these damn stories? They either end in complete disaster or the husband turns into some pathetic bastard. Like Brian. God, he's a firefighter, a decorated hero. Shawn is the father of the girl he saved. What? I couldn't believe my ears. Let me get this straight. Brian risked his life to save Shawn's daughter, and this bastard repays him by having sex with his wife and participating in all this nasty stuff. Now I was seething with rage. If before all this only irritated me, now I was truly furious. This story was the last straw for me. The whole city, and perhaps the whole country, knew about this salvation. Brian's face and body were severely disfigured because he wrapped the girl in his jacket and shared a breathing apparatus with her so that her face would not be burned by the wall of fire through which he carried her. This thought made me shudder. Although it was clear that Debbie was beginning to realize the horror she was in, I was sure that all four of them needed to be taught lessons. Each of them has their own truth that they must learn, and it is I who will become their teacher. Now I know the truth, or at least most of it. It's time to start breaking their plans. I want this to end and be forgotten. I don't want to go to work and wonder what you're doing here. She was on her knees, covering her face with her hands and bursting into tears. So, my loving wife, if I let this shit happen, will it be a one-time thing? After this, will it be over? No later? These words clearly confused her. She realized that I was not going to allow this, but I suddenly opened the door for her. Will she remain silent, or will she walk into my trap? Yeah, no, I don't know. Lucy said that the more we do it, the more we'll like it. That if we do it once, we'll want more. But I'm afraid that what you said about trust and everything else. Her voice was weak, full of uncertainty and shame. It was clear that she now regretted that she had suggested it at all. But until she understands that the very thought of this was unacceptable, nothing will change. Well, my dear, my trust in you has already been destroyed. You have already been dishonest. Maybe I could still, perhaps, agree to a one-time experiment. But never in my life would I resign myself to becoming like Brian and his prostitutes. I placed the almost full glass on the edge of the table and missed, dropping it to the floor. Then he put on a whole performance. He removed the glass, dropped a chair, and fussed noisily. After that, I went to the bathroom and pretended to vomit. "Are you okay, honey?" she called from behind the door. "Take off." When I returned, she had finally taken off her coat, and I noticed that she had poured herself some brandy. "So what's your plan? When are you going to become a slutty woman?" "I don't know. I'm confused." The meaning of my question finally dawned on her. "What do you mean, loose woman?" she screamed. "That's right. Girls of easy virtue get money, and you will simply become a slutty woman that no one needs. And one day you'll be all alone and have sex with strangers for a bag of chips." I almost shouted, stumbling over and pouring the rest of the bottle of rum into a glass. She started crying again and wouldn't stop. I could hear her trying but couldn't say a word. I was glad that I was not drunk, otherwise I would not have been able to resist hugging her and comforting her. Eventually she was able, or rather I was able to understand what she was trying to say between her sobs and sobs. Something like, she didn't want to, but Lucy kept assuring her that it would be good for us. I poured myself a glass of water, drank half of it, and handed it to her. She muttered a faint, "Thank you," in a hoarse voice. I wanted to hug her and say that I forgive her, but she was not ready for this. However, me too. If I said this now, I wouldn't mean what I say. There were lessons to be learned, and if I was to teach them, she needed to remain confused. She put the glass down and sat in silence for a few minutes, and then picked up her glass of brandy. After taking a sip, I noticed that she had forgotten about the brandy and was expecting water. I broke the silence. "Perhaps you could invite them all over so we can discuss this." I paused, watching as she drained her glass and went to pour herself another. "But," I continued, "if, and I emphasize, if I agree, then under conditions. The first two are mandatory in any case if you want us to stay together. Tomorrow you hand in your resignation and start looking for another job, and you will no longer communicate with Lucy after you leave. Not only with her, but also with those perverted bastards." The last word sounded loudly, with hatred and contempt. "After this, I will seriously think about it, and if I agree, you will promise that this will be a one-time event, one and only. It will never happen again, will not be asked or discussed." But I don't think I can. "No," I shouted. "I've had enough. I don't want to talk anymore. Just let me know when they arrive, and then we'll discuss everything." With these words, I drained my glass and went upstairs to the bedroom. I set the alarm while undressing. It wasn't even 7:30 yet. I definitely couldn't go to bed that early, so I put on a robe and was about to go downstairs, but I heard her talking on the phone. "Yes, Brian, I'll wait." Pause. "Lucy, he's not happy. I don't know why I even let you persuade me to think about this." Another paused. "Well, he said that I should change jobs and not communicate with you anymore." Pause. "I'll have to. He's very angry. As I told you last night and today at work, he definitely won't do what you're doing." "No, but he wants to meet us all." Pause. "Well, he made it clear that he might agree once, but only once." Pause. "No, I really don't think he'll agree." Pause. "No, I'm not sure. He was drunk. The only thing I'm sure of is that he wants a meeting, and after that I won't be able to communicate with you." Long silence. "Yes, Friday." Pause. "And no, and Shawn too." Pause. "Lord, not Mark and Winston." "Okay, see you tomorrow." Furious at what I had just heard, I almost ran down the stairs. "So who the hell are Mark and Winston, and when were you going to tell me about them?" "Two more lovers of Lucy." "And you already slept with them?" "No, no, no, I really haven't slept with anyone but you since we got together." "Honestly, Joe, 2 months ago I wouldn't have had any doubts, but now I really don't know. I think you heard that I scheduled dinner for Friday so we could meet. I will cancel it and not go to work again. I'll send Dave my resignation letter tomorrow." "No, submit an application with a regular month of work. Dave deserves it. You shouldn't betray all your obligations because of this bitch. Leave Friday as it is. Let this creature and these sick bastards come." What follows are thoughts and details of the dinner, including meeting Lucy and her entourage. "I'm so sorry, honey. I don't know why I let her talk me into even thinking about it," she whispered, looking me straight in the eyes. I looked at her. "True, dear. Now I find the whole idea disgusting. I don't understand how she could seem good. I don't want anyone but you. I don't know how she convinced me to even think about it. I don't know. I really don't know." She was shaking, tears rolling down her cheeks again. Now I saw that she really understood. I walked up to her and hugged her. "Okay, honey, I need you to tell me everything you know." I was shocked, disgusted, and didn't know what else to feel when she told me everything. Why the hell does Brian allow himself to be used like this? Besides, what kind of power does this bitch have over you? Why would you even imagine this, let alone drag me into this? Still confused, I asked her a few questions, but decided to focus on the immediate tasks. "When I returned home, I thought it was the end for us. I thought you ruined our marriage, but now I see hope," I said, releasing the hug, then took her by the shoulders. "So, love of my life, now you have a choice." I looked into her eyes, and any residual drunkenness disappeared. "Me or divorce?" "You, darling, I love you. she answered, sobbing. Are you sure? Yes, of course, I love you. How can you doubt? She hesitated. Sorry, stupid question, she added, and a distorted smile briefly flashed on her tear-stained face. No more requests for such things. No, never. I didn't even want to. Lucy just kept telling me how fun it was. She looked into my eyes, and I almost believed her. By how many? So what was it? The idea of being plus size, sex with several partners at the same time, a what? Yes, no, I don't know, she answered confusedly. That was the way she talked about it. She made it so exciting, such a natural next step. We talked for some time, and finally I explained to her what she had to do in the coming days. I made her say everything several times until I was sure that she understood my requirements. I didn't tell her what came in the mail today or mention my appointment. Jack and I worked hard over the next few days to finish installing the new roof by Friday. We still had to stay late at work on Friday to finish everything on time. When I returned home, our guests were already there and apparently had managed to drink a couple of glasses. I waved through the open living room door and went upstairs to shower and change. When I joined the group, I was pleasantly surprised to find Brian and Shawn in the living room and my wife and Lucy in the kitchen. Debs was right. Shawn really was a big guy, even bigger than Brian, and he towered over me. Brian introduced me to Shawn, and as we shook hands, his confident, smug grin faded as he failed to prove his strength by squeezing my hand. I definitely poured myself a strong glass of vodka and went into the kitchen. Debs greeted me with a hug and a kiss. I gently pressed her to the sink and, kissing her, poured the contents of my glass into the sink. I let go of Debs, and when Lucy tried to do the same, I dodged her hands without saying a word and headed back to the men. Brian and Shawn weren't having a deep conversation. Brian stood there, clearly uncomfortable, with his eyes down on the floor, and I noticed that he didn't even have a glass. Shawn, on the other hand, was sitting in my chair, staring at the TV, looking like he was the man of the house. I poured Brian some good whiskey and handed it to him. No, thanks, he muttered. Don't be stupid, I replied. Lucy and I don't want him to drink, Shawn said, his voice demanding submission. Ignoring him, I said, have a drink, Brian. Then, looking Shawn in the eyes, I said firmly, a guest is drinking in my house. I insist, and it cannot be otherwise. Without giving him a chance to object, I turned on the music and turned off the TV. I watched it, Shawn stated again with authority. One more thing I insist on. No fucking Noel Edmonds on my TV, not now, not ever. Shawn looked unhappy that I had already disobeyed him twice. The three of us spent the next half hour in awkward conversation before Lucy appeared and announced that Debs was ready to serve. We sat down at the table, I took his dominant place, and Shawn sat opposite me. Brian sat to my left, next to him was Lucy between her men, and to my right was my wife. I poured the wine into glasses and brought myself another vodka. This time it's mostly water. A polite and meaningless conversation ensued. The only meaningful thing that came out was praise for the food. I made sure that their glasses remained full, mine and Debs's not refilled, but replaced. Debs drank, but I didn't. As we finished the main course, Lucy finally broke down and addressed the elephant in the room. We all know why we're here, Joe. We know you want to ask about our entertainment before you play, so ask your questions. I need one more drink before I start talking, I replied. I got up, went into the living room with a glass, and returned with a bottle, deliberately emptying the glass and refilling it again. Yes, your entertainment, as you call it, I said, filling our glasses with wine. I read several stories on that site, many of them like Debs. Debs and I looked at each other and smiled, and I took her hand. From what I've read, there are many reasons why things like this start, and it's usually said that it's to improve the couple's sex life. Lucy drained her glass and held it out for a refill. I poured it for her and asked, "Where did you start?" Well, originally it was because Brian caught me with another man, and it turned him on. At these words, a muffled came out of Brian, as if he wanted to say something, but looked embarrassed. I said nothing, waiting for Lucy to continue. I think you want to know what I did with the other man. Honestly, I was bored and lonely because of Brian's schedule. You work 42 hours a week, don't you, Brian? I asked. He nodded in response, and I noticed his neck turning red. Left behind. She? You're kidding. I myself sometimes work more than 80 hours a week. What is she talking about? I thought. I turned back to Lucy. She had already started, and alcohol helped her continue. We tried watching him a couple of times, but it scared Carl, my lover at the time, and he didn't like it. Then we advertised on a dating site, and off we went. Of course, when Carl found out what we were doing, he was furious and left me. Bastard. This made me chuckle. Carl liked to use someone else's wife, but he was not ready to share her. How did you and Debs start discussing your hobby? I asked. She overheard my conversation with Winston on the phone the morning after a particularly good weekend. There was not a shadow of shame in her words, rather pride. Brian looked more and more awkward. Shawn, in turn, stared at Debs more and more with lust. So, what's a typical evening like? For example, today, when are you coming home? There was a look between Lucy and Shawn as if they thought they were staying there. For the first time, I noticed confusion on Lucy's face. Perhaps Debs was letting them know that something was going to happen today. I smiled inside. We thought we'd be playing here today with both of you. Is it true? Oh, sorry, I thought you realized this was just a reconnaissance mission for me to figure out a few things before we make a decision. Lucy looked surprised, to say the least, and Shawn looked very disappointed, almost like a child whose puppy had been taken away. This quickly turned to a hint of anger as he realized that this evening was not going to go the way he wanted. Anyway, Lucy, you were just about to tell me the details. It would be easier if Shawn showed, she remarked. Perhaps you are right. But I need to get to know a person a little better than just hello before I say, please have sex with my wife. I reached for the ashtray, bad etiquette, smoking between courses, but I don't care, my house, my rules. Added, especially a man who likes Noel Edmonds. Shawn looked at me, not knowing whether to say something or not. If Lucy doesn't want to tell, what about you, Brian? What do you get out of this arrangement? Well, he takes pleasure in seeing me so completely satisfied, Lucy interrupted before he could say more. Yes, but what does he get? For myself? I asked. Debs told me it was all about getting more aroused, to spice up your sex life. But how has it strengthened your sex life as a couple? Are you doing this more often, for longer, in more interesting ways? Oh no, Brian isn't having sex with me anymore, stupid. I have Shawn, Mark, and Winston for that, Lucy giggled. I needed to get away before I lost control of what I was saying. I put out my cigarette in the ashtray and apologized, swaying as I left the room. Glass in hand, I said over my shoulder, when I get back from the toilet, you'll have to explain this to me again. My vodka was poured out and replaced with water. I zipped up and headed back to the battle room. Before entering, I stopped and listened. They spoke too quietly for me to make out the words. Brian spoke as I took my seat. I really enjoy it, seeing her experience those emotions over and over again. Here is a more restrained version of the text. Our seats at the table were positioned so that when he looked at me, only Debs and I could see his face. He gave me a quick wink and continued, it became especially meaningful when her 3 friends arrived at the same time. It wasn't easy at first, but tears began to form in his eyes. It was difficult at first, but we decided that we would take things better after a short break. Lucy finished for him, as if making a prepared statement. Excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom, Brian said, his voice betraying the pain he was experiencing. You can go, Lucy replied. When he walked out, I ignored the fact that she had just given him permission to go to the toilet and turned to Shawn, emptying his glass of water with ostentatious carelessness. Tell me, Shawn, how did you get into all this? Well, I came to the station to thank him. He saved my daughter. He saved her life. I nodded. But he was still in the hospital. He was badly burned. When I arrived, he was sleeping, and Lucy and I started talking. We became friends, and after a while, when they started playing with others, they invited me to join. And I'm glad he joined, Lucy chimed in. His control, his imagination, his ingenuity are amazing. I would never have tried half of what we did without him. It's a shame Brian has to work. Otherwise, we could play more extreme games. But we have to be careful not to injure him. Injure? I asked, with a deliberate lisp accent, maintaining the image of a drunk. I noticed that she seemed to have let something slip that she didn't want to reveal. Well, we do the same thing as you, only maybe a little tougher. What? Brian likes discomfort, pain. We tie him up in uncomfortable positions. He likes it, you say? If Brian had looked awkward before, now Shawn was clearly uncomfortable. I felt a chill run through me and spoke quickly so that no one would notice. And tell me again why we should want this. Well, you yourself love such things to be dominated, to serve your mistress. Partly true, I admitted. I like to take care of my wife. I like to make her happy. And yes, we are more open than most. We tried some unusual things, but all this is only possible on the basis of complete trust. I noticed that Shawn perked up a little when he heard my words. His smug grin, which had previously faded, returned. Debs came back into the room as I continued. But for me, all this is possible only within the framework of marriage, a union of two people who love each other and always support each other. This is their own business. I looked at Lucy and Shawn. But what you're doing, it's not like marriage. The two people who once swore vows to each other have long since disappeared. Brian is a man who suffers and still stays by your side in the hope that the woman he loved and took as his wife will one day return. And you are a person who has lost his true purpose and allows others to manipulate you. I pointed at Shawn. I looked at them both intently, my gaze lingering on each. And how do you pay him? You dirty monster on your feet owes Brian 20 years of your life. And you, I turned to Shawn, you owe him the life of your daughter. And you both betray this worthy man, a real hero, for what? For a few hours of pleasure, paid for by years of pain and humiliation for him. I looked around at them again. Now, get out of my house and never come here again. If you don't, you'll regret it. You don't know anything. Nothing, Shawn exploded. Your bitch is ready for this. I know I've been having sex with her for weeks. He screamed and stood up, clenching his fists. He then glanced at Brian's empty seat. Bernie, come here, he yelled. I was momentarily surprised that they would call him by that derogatory nickname even here, but I already knew they were making fun of him. Follow him, girl of easy virtue, he commanded Lucy. Obediently, Lucy walked past him and headed upstairs, shouting, Bernie, quickly get back here. I smiled as I filled my glass. Soon they will realize that Brian is gone, and they will be furious. Shawn looked like he was ready to hit me. I needed to push a little more to get it there. I looked at him. Your days of bullying him are over. Now do yourself a favor and get out of my house, you pathetic, worthless bastard, before I hurt you. What the fuck? Do you think you can handle me, you little bastard? I'll rip your head off and shit in your neck. Ooh, I'm so scared, sucker. I specifically emphasized the insult, taking a cigarette out of the pack. Where is Brian, you bastards? Lou screamed, rushing into the room. I don't know. Did he fall into your body, you corrupt bitch? I laughed. Maybe you should hire 4 divers to find him. And at the same time, we had sex with you later. I think it's time for you to think about a replacement. I took the glass in my left hand, and in the same hand, I had an unlit cigarette. He clicked his Zippo lighter. So, hero, are you ready to be her cuckold? Can you handle what she put Brian through? Hey, future cuckold. He moved towards me, but I brought the glass of vodka to my lips, emptied it in one gulp, and flicked the lighter. When he walked around the table and rushed towards me, red with rage, I breathed burning vodka right into his face. He screamed, and I continued the attack. I hit him in the stomach, then again in the stomach. Ignoring the flames, he grabbed him by the hair at the back of his head and kneed him in the face. He collapsed, and for complete pleasure, I stepped on his groin. He lay unconscious, and his burned face resembled a pathetic parody of Nicolas Cage from Ghost Rider. And it was weak, more like a bad tan than a real burn show. Luz screamed and didn't stop until Debbie slapped her across the face. Shawn began to moan as he came to his senses. Debbie looked at Luz and said, "Okay, bitch, take this human torch to the hospital and come up with a good excuse about what happened and where. Because you weren't here." Luz looked stunned, looking around for something. "Where is Brian?" I looked at her and calmly answered, "Safe." Realizing that they had lost, they got up and left. Burn blisters were already starting to appear on Shawn's head, and his long blonde hair was now missing. When I closed the door behind them, the bitch hissed, "This is not the end yet." It's stupid, but I ignored her words. We started cleaning up, loaded the dishes into the dishwasher, and destroyed all traces of them being there in case they told the truth and brought the police. When we were sure that everything was clean, I poured the remaining wine into 2 glasses. We sat down and started talking. Letter and more. It all started for me that night when you came up with this idiotic idea to open our marriage, she began. Then I started to worry. And then, when you tied me up, and this prostitute showed up at the door, it became obvious that you had planned it in advance. I was terrified. Shawn was lucky I got that letter, because if he had screwed you, I would have just killed him. You mean you would do more than that? What letter? The only reason I didn't do more to him than I already did is because I don't trust this girl of easy virtue. Her tongue wiggles as easily as her legs spread. Jesus, all he got was a slight kick and a slight burn. I ignored her question about the letter and continued. But what about you? It seems to me that you give in too easily to persuasion. What does this bitch know that I don't? She looked worried. I'll tell you everything, but please finish the story first. Then I will explain everything. Whatever it was, I hoped that my worst suspicions would not be confirmed, but I agreed to finish my story before she began. I came home the next day, the day it was raining, and picked up the mail. There were only flyers and one hand-addressed letter on the envelope. I was curious. I almost never have handwritten letters, except for birthday cards. I opened it and read it. I took the letter out of my pocket and began to read. "Joe, we don't know each other very well, but I feel I have an obligation to warn you before it's too late. A few years ago, Lucy talked me into agreeing to let her share her bed with other men. I agreed because I loved her. At first it was tolerable, I won't say it's good, but then Shawn came along and my life turned into hell. Now it looks like he wants to pick up your wife. He can be charming when he wants to achieve something. Don't let him get hold of her. Ruin your life the way he ruined mine. I don't think anything has happened yet, but I'm afraid it's a matter of time. If you need to know more, call me at the station and we can meet. My number is XXXXXXX, but hurry up." I then thought that I should have looked at him at the station even earlier, so I called. After his shift, we met at a small diner on the outskirts, which we thought would be almost empty. When he arrived, I already had beer. I offered him a drink. "No, thank you," he said, and explained that he could get in trouble even for being late, and he didn't want her to know that he was talking to me. I bought him some orange juice, and we sat in a corner to talk privately. We sat down, and he immediately warned me. "Don't interrupt. I need to tell you everything at once, otherwise I won't be able to." And he began to speak. "Shawn is evil," he said. "It destroyed his life, his marriage, and his entire self. He couldn't stand it anymore and was about to leave. He said he thought Shawn suspected him, and now he wanted to set me up to be Brian's replacement. And this stupid prostitute with whom he is married helps Shawn organize everything. He talked about how Lucy fills your head with nonsense about their happy life and how they like their lifestyle. But he clarified, we does not include him. I will never forget the look on his face when he said those words. This amazed me. I saw a broken man in front of me. He then said that he thinks you haven't crossed the line yet, but it could happen at any moment. Recently, he caught you with Shawn. He said that his appearance seemed to bring you to your senses, and you left. But he was afraid that it was temporary. According to him, he probably paid for the fact that he interfered, although he himself did not say so. And so, with the same desperate expression on his face, he said, "Save her. Save yourself. Don't repeat my mistakes." I couldn't continue. Tears came to my eyes, remembering that exhausted face. He wanted to help, needed help, but like a true hero, he tried to save someone else first. I told him that I already understood everything, and now, thanks to his warning, I have a chance that they don't know about. I assured him that you seem to be falling for her stories, but still internally resist. And now you know for sure. I won't tolerate this, especially after last night. I thanked him, told him that he may have saved my marriage, and suggested that I think about whether he wanted to get out of this situation himself. We agreed to meet in a day. We nodded to each other, and I walked away, leaving him there. On the way home, I stopped at the store, bought vodka, and began to develop a plan. When you got home, I pretended to be drunk to get you to confirm what Brian told me and to admit what you were hiding. Then, as you know, I told just as much as I thought was necessary to make my plan work. Yes, she sobbed. It was only when you returned that I realized that you weren't drunk. You're great at portraying it. She thought for a second and asked, "What do you mean when you say exactly as much as you considered necessary? You really don't understand?" And no, although I probably understand, and I don't know how many times I need to apologize. I wanted to say that you can never apologize enough, but I stopped myself. Instead, he asked, "Well, what did you want to tell me?" She blushed. "I shouldn't have done that. You'll be angry." I had the distinct feeling that she was right as I watched her gather the courage to tell me. "Remember that Saturday, a couple of months ago?" I nodded slowly. Yes, I knew what night she was talking about. That was the night I first realized that our sex life had turned into complete crap. I said nothing, wondering what we were doing then. Nothing new, and I finished everything ahead of time. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't loving, it wasn't passionate. It was just a half-hearted attempt at acting out one of those damn stories. First, she made me kneel with my head down and tied my wrists to my ankles, and then secured my thighs. I was uncomfortable and didn't feel relaxed. All this happened a week after we started reading those stories. I was about to say something when she gagged me. Then she put on her headphones and turned on the music. This helped a little so far. Apart from the gag, nothing unexpected had happened. I felt that she left for a while, but soon returned. She stood in front of me, and I raised my head to look at her. She was wearing a black leather mask, a plaid shirt, jeans, and work boots. This sight did not attract me at all. For a moment, I was even afraid that it was someone else, but she took off her headphones and tried to calm me down. Her words convinced me that it was her. I was neither relaxed nor excited. Then she tried to blindfold me. For some reason, this seemed like too much for me. Maybe those stories came into my head, or maybe something else, I'm not sure. But I began to resist, shaking my head violently and not letting her secure the bandage. She kept trying to persuade me to relax and calm down, but I didn't give in. Her voice sounded a little worried. "Why are you resisting?" she asked. If it weren't for the gag, I might have been able to answer. Soon she took out the lubricant, clearly preparing for something next, but I again began to resist, not allowing her to continue. In the end, I convinced her that I was really fucking angry and I wasn't going to give in to her plans easily. She stopped and untied me. Yes, I remembered that night. That's when something changed. We then decided that if we ever played bondage again, we would set a safe word that meant stop. Please don't hate me. You can hit me if you want, but please don't hate me. I guess the anger from the memories showed on my face. Hate her? I didn't know. Angry, undoubtedly. Other feelings, emotions, disgust, pity, perhaps sadness and despair. I took a deep breath before speaking. Continue. I tried to speak in an even voice. Lucy. I let her in. She filmed everything on video. She didn't have time to say anything further because the back door swung open with a bang. The sound of breaking wood and breaking glass caught our attention. Two men burst into the house, one with a tire iron, the other with a pistol. The gun was pointed at me. They were wearing hoodies, baggy pants, and baseball caps. I might have laughed if it weren't for the gun. Looks like we have a stupid cuckold here. One of those who doesn't understand his place. Get the hell out of my house now, I shout, covering Debs with myself. Listen, cuckold, now this carcass belongs to me, says the one with the gun. You should have known your place better, but you fought it out. You stole Bernie from us and hurt my friend, so now you're in for a crash course, and it starts right now. The shock of their appearance paralyzed me, and the look at the gun in his hand did not allow me to move from my place. Come on, Mark, let's prepare the bedroom, came Lucy's voice. I didn't even notice how she came in after them. Come here, bitch, or I'll shoot your wimp in the head. Squishy? Seriously, he clearly knew what happened before. Well, give a jerk a gun, and he'll feel cool. No, stay behind me, Debs. If this one shoots, he'll have to run, I said, trying to convince myself of this as well as her. And no, honey, I'm the one who got us into this. I can't let you get hurt. She looked scared to death. Her movements were wooden and clumsy. I extended my hand to her, our fingers lightly touching. Her hand was wet and sticky. She approached him, and he put the gun to her head. Well, cuckold, you were right. If I shoot, my brother and I will really run. But now the gun is pointed at your bitch's head, so no heroics. His voice became louder, the confidence in his tone growing. Lead us, bitch. And you, cuckold, follow us. If you do something wrong, she's dead. Debs turned towards the stairs. He grabbed her left shoulder and pointed the gun at her back. It seemed that every step she took was difficult. She walked towards the stairs, and I got an idea. I hoped that she would understand my intention. Are you going on vacation somewhere this year? I turned to the man, whose name was presumably Winston. What? I asked if you were going somewhere on vacation. What the hell are you talking about? Debs stopped at the foot of the stairs. Let's move, bitch, he said, pushing her. I took this as a sign that she understood my plan. She began to walk up the stairs. Debs had almost reached the last steps when I said, We're going to Wales, to Aberystwyth. Debs froze as she stepped onto the landing with one foot. Move, he shouted, pushing her. She fell forward. I grabbed Winston by the hood, dropped to my knees, pulled him down, and punched him in the back of his knee. He flipped over me and flew head over heels down the stairs. I turned around and rushed after him, jumping on him from the fourth step. I landed on his chest. There was a sharp crunch, and the pistol flew to the side with a metallic clang. Ignoring him, I called Debs. She rushed down to me. At the top, I saw Lucy, and behind her, Mark, buttoning his pants. I grabbed the keys from the hook, and we ran out the door to the car. As we drove away, the window broke and glass showered us. I broke the speed limit as I raced toward the police station. As soon as I mentioned the gun, the police sent out an armed patrol. They found the house empty except for Winston's body at the bottom of the stairs. His cervical spine was broken. Lucy and Mark were arrested at her home, and both were charged with trespassing, conspiracy to commit assault, attempted assault, threats, and destruction of property. I was initially accused of manslaughter, but the prosecutor's office decided not to press charges. Brian has moved away, and Debs and I are trying to get our lives back together. Will I ever be able to forgive her? Will we stay together? Maybe. Only time will tell. Will I be able to trust her again? Not for the world. The back door closed with a thud. He didn't even say bye. I realized this and rushed to the front door, forgetting for a moment that it was boarded up. I fell to my knees and sobbed, angry at this obstacle. I cried for a long time before I was able to get up and go back to the kitchen, sniffling and wiping my tears and snot with my hands. He just went to work, I said out loud, trying to calm myself, but I burst into tears again. I wanted to know, I wanted to ask myself why. Why we may be on the verge of divorce. But I had no reason to ask. I knew why, and it was entirely my fault. Yes, I could blame Lucy. I wanted to blame Lucy, but to be honest, I can't. It was I who listened to her suggestions, no matter how much she convinced and forced me. I listened to her, although I knew I shouldn't, although I knew it was wrong, and most importantly, when Joe said no, I didn't listen to him. He said no so many times, but like a fool, I only listened to Lucy. No, I screamed at the top of my voice. No, 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 I repeated, emphasizing each no by hitting the kitchen table. Tuck, tuck. I looked at the back door. Mrs. Jones, I need to talk to you about that night, a woman's voice said. Mrs. Jones, this is the police. Please open the door. Knock, knock, knock. Mrs. Jones, are you all right? Please open the door. I rose from my chair with difficulty and opened the door. I looked at the woman in uniform in front of me and burst into tears again. She helped me back onto my chair. Are you all right? Should I call someone? The policewoman asked. No, there's no one, I sobbed. No one at all? No, there is no one to whom I could tell, to whom I could confess what I did, what I almost did, the things I caused. You can talk to me if you want, the officer said. Should you make us some tea? I nodded, and she turned on the kettle. Excuse me for a minute, I'll tell the police station that I'm busy so they don't bother us. I nodded again, and she left. She returned just as the kettle was boiling. I felt a little better from her presence. She made tea and brought everything on a tray. After pouring the tea, she placed her hand on top of mine. Your name is Deborah, right? Debbie, my name is Debbie or Debs, I answered, barely able to swallow the words. Okay, Debbie. My name is Sandra. I was supposed to be on duty Friday night, but I see there's more going on here than just a home invasion and attempted assault. Why don't you start from the beginning? It was a few months ago. I went to the toilet at work to wash my hands. I heard Lucy. She was in one of the booths. No, not like that, she said on the phone. I tried to smile, but it probably came out like an ugly grimace. I now know that it was Winston. I glanced at the door leading to the stairs. That is, the same. Dead man. Sandra nodded and gently squeezed my hand. She talked about sex, about how she spent the weekend. It was disgusting, the things she talked about, her laughter, her talking about other men. I froze in place, didn't want to listen, but couldn't bring myself to leave. I poured myself another cup of tea from the teapot. She finished speaking and immediately left. She saw me and realized that I had heard everything. I felt so guilty eavesdropping. I thought she would be ashamed, that she would try to somehow justify everything. I sobbed. But instead, she looked me straight in the eye and asked if I liked listening to her. She asked if I was turned on by this. I ran out of the room, feeling disgusted with her, but even more disgusted with myself. Why? Because she was right. I can't explain it. It was disgusting. I felt disgusted, but I was so horny. After some time, I went home, pretending to be sick. You didn't tell your husband about this, right? Sandra asked softly, still holding my hand. No, I had to, I wanted to, but the way I felt. I was too ashamed, I answered, staring at the empty cup, realizing that this was my first mistake. The next day, when I came to work, Lucy was waiting for me. She wanted to talk, to explain herself, and like a fool, I agreed to meet her for lunch. The first thing I told her was that I couldn't believe she was cheating on Brian. But she immediately stopped me, saying that she was not cheating on him, that he not only knew about it, but was also participating. Sorry, I need to go to the bathroom, I said, and headed to the bathroom. When I saw myself in the mirror, I was shocked. I didn't comb my hair, my eyes were red, my face was stained with dried tears and snot. I was wearing only a dressing gown. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and changed into a t-shirt and jeans before returning to my guest. I've made some fresh tea, I hope it's okay, Sandra said as I returned to the kitchen. I nodded and sat down. Sandra waited patiently for me to speak again. After that day, she hooked me, I continued. I wanted to know more, but then she said she wouldn't tell me anything else. But at the same time, she made it clear that we are talking about something bigger. I begged her to tell me, but she refused. The next week, at lunch, she introduced me to Shawn. I must admit that I liked him. Of course, now I understand that it was a production. After that, we seemed to accidentally bump into him at least once a week. And then, a couple of weeks later, at Stacy's bachelorette party, when we were all drunk, she said that maybe she'd tell me what it was all about if I told her all of Joe and I's secrets in the bedroom. I immediately said that this was impossible. Joe made me promise that I would never discuss our relationship with my girlfriends. Then she asked if I had a dirty secret that no one knew about, not even Joe, and like an idiot, I told her. I was trembling all over, whether from anger or from fear, I didn't know. Then she threatened to tell Joe about it if I didn't tell her everything about our relationship. And again, like a complete idiot, I said, all the dirty details, what I knew Joe would never want anyone to know. Tears began to flow down my cheeks again as I realized how many times I had betrayed the man I loved. Why didn't this occur to me earlier? Why did I let that bitch trick me? Was it really that bad? Sandra asked, looking into my eyes. There was a moment of intersection, I admitted, lowering my head in shame. About a month after I started dating Joe, I was still seeing my previous boyfriend. I know I cheated on one of them, but I'm still not sure who. How could I be such a fool and tell her about it? I said, looking at Sandra. It was clear from her face that she did not know what to answer. I continued my sad confession. She kept her word. She started telling me about Brian's role. She arranged for me to meet him, and he told me how much fun it was. Of course, now I understand that he only said what he was told. You didn't know him before? Sandra asked. I knew, but only in passing. I think Joe knew him better, but they weren't close friends. Anyway, when Lucy and Brian told me about all this, she started saying how much Joe and I would love it. I immediately said that Joe would not agree to this, but Lucy again convinced me that since he and I, did certain things in the bedroom, it meant that inside himself he wanted it. Oh God, how stupid I was. Then she gave me the website, said that if we read the stories, it would give Joe an idea, arouse his curiosity. But no, as soon as I showed him the site, he got angry and refused to even discuss it. Instead of listening to Joe, I, like a complete idiot, allowed her to talk me into having a bondage session with him, more extreme than anything we had tried before, and secretly letting her film it. She said it would help him understand how he reacts, help him accept what he supposedly wants and what he refuses. Everything got confused. At this time, I met Shawn, again, after work, at Lucy's. He kissed me, and I let him. I don't know what I was thinking, I just let him. I think I even kissed him back, and then before I knew it, his hand was on my chest, not on the side of my clothes, but inside my bra. Thank goodness Brian came in and interrupted us, otherwise I don't know what would have happened. I ran out of there. I took a deep breath through my nose, sniffling loudly. Why couldn't I understand what Joe was saying? How could I let her drag me into this? I mean, at first, like I said, it excited me, but then it turned into an intellectual battle. Although what kind of battle is there one smart woman against an idiot? I've had enough tea. Do you want something to drink? No, thanks, I'm still on duty. Are you really sure you want a drink? I'm not sure of anything at all, except that I need strong alcohol. I went into the living room, poured myself a lot of whiskey, took a sip, added more to the glass, and returned to the kitchen. Where am I staying? Oh, yes. So I tied Joe up, made him vulnerable, put on headphones so he wouldn't hear anything, gagged, and then went and let Lucy in. When I returned to him, I saw that he was clearly dissatisfied, and I shattered the illusion by taking off my headphones and trying to calm him down. Nothing came of it. He didn't want to listen. He couldn't say anything because he had been silenced, but he kept fighting. I didn't want to give up. Lucy convinced me that he really wanted it. I tried to blindfold him, but he wouldn't let me. Even when I refused the bandage, I still tried to get him to obey and agree to this plan. I burst into tears inconsolably. Joe, I'm so sorry. I was such a fool, a real fool. I couldn't ask him for forgiveness. I didn't deserve it. He was supposed to beat me to a pulp and then shoot me and get rid of me. This is what I deserve. No. Sandra's soothing voice cut through my despair. You made a mistake, that's all. No, I've made a lot of mistakes too, too many. He will never forgive me, and I don't blame him. He'll be as stupid as I am if he forgives me. I took a long sip of whiskey and trembled. Anyway, when I finally untied him, he was very angry. He hardly spoke to me for several days. And then, when we started talking and having sex again, I thought we were over it. Our sex life has changed. Now I understand that it was my fault again. In an attempt to make amends, I tried to act out scenes from stories from that damn site. He, poor thing, was just trying to make me happy. Then I let her talk me into tying Joe up again. This time, however, she had to come in and sleep with him in order for him to agree to me having another man. But I didn't want another man. The only reason I even considered it was because I was stupid enough to believe Lucy when she said Joe wanted it. When I sit here and tell you all this, I myself cannot believe that I was so stupid. How can you trust me? And Joe, he will never believe or trust me again. So I undressed him and tied him up. I began to provoke him and play with him, teasing him until he began to beg to let him continue. But I stopped him again and again. Lucy was late, although she should have come and continued the game, but I decided to take matters into my own hands. I asked what he thought about another participant for our games. The reaction was immediate. He immediately became serious, said nothing, and demanded to untie him, using our pre-agreed word, which meant that everything needed to be stopped. I was confused and could not think clearly. I knew I had to set him free because that was the meaning of the word. But I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I ran downstairs and called for Lucy. She went for a walk and lost track of time. Oh, damn. I suddenly realized that Lucy should have come and taken control of the situation. I started to feel sick with nerves, and I grabbed my mouth with my hand. I reached the sink so as not to completely lose control. I vomited until my stomach was completely empty, and the cramps almost turned me inside out. How was Joe still here this morning? I don't want to live anymore. I don't think I deserve to live, I said between spasms. I drank water from the tap and rinsed the sink. Luckily, I only vomited liquid. I felt dizzy and could barely make it to the chair. Sitting up, I took deep breaths to regain my composure. Debs, are you okay? You look awfully pale. Maybe you should lie down in another room. I heard Sandra's voice through the noise in my ears. I must have said yes, because she put her arm around my shoulders and helped me walk to the living room. She laid me down on the sofa and sat with me silently until the room stopped spinning. Then she brought me water. I sat down to drink it as I started to feel better. Excuse me. Something dawned on me. I realized what had almost happened then, at the moment when I tied him up. Until that moment, it had never occurred to me what exactly she was planning. If she had done it then, I'm sure Joe would be in your cell now. From what you said, I think, and between us, I wouldn't blame him, Sandra said. Do you want to continue? I thought about her words. Continue. It hurt, but now everything is clearer. And pain. Well, I deserved it, and more than that, for what I did to Joe. Oh my God, no. I just remembered what Shawn had said at dinner. Yes, I want to continue. Think of it as a rehearsal. I need to tell Joe all this, and it's only now that I'm telling you that I realize what a bitch I've been. God, Joe will never forgive me. I know I've said this before, but every word makes it worse. I thought for a moment to remember where I left off, and then continued. I went back upstairs. He shouted Aberystwyth, our code word, over and over again. I told him he didn't mean it, but he kept demanding that I untie him. I hoped Lucy would come soon. I listened to see if she would open the back door as we had agreed, but instead the doorbell rang. I was scared. What if it wasn't her? What if someone heard his screams? I left him again and went to the door. I didn't let her inside. Now I'm so glad I didn't let her in, especially now that I think I know exactly what she was up to. I felt dizzy again. I lay down, breathing deeply. Then I went back upstairs and untied it. He was so angry, and rightly so. But even then, he tried again to let me know how stupid I was. He reminded me of our basic rules for sex games. Rule number 1, we both have to agree, otherwise nothing will happen. Rule number 2, we can't tell anyone what's going on in our bedroom. I admitted that I had broken the second rule. Oh my God, I was still sure I hadn't broken the first one. What can I say? Joe was furious, to say the least. And when I told him I was only sharing it with Lucy, he kept getting angry. Then I told him that he had nothing to worry about. He and Lucy had secrets of their own, more serious than ours. He demanded an explanation. I reached for water. The glass was empty, and Sandra filled it without even waiting for a request. After taking a sip, I continued. He got even angrier when I said I couldn't tell because Lucy swore me to secrecy. In hindsight, I understand why he was angry. If I can't keep his secrets, why should I keep others' secrets? It took him a while, but he finally pulled the truth out of me. Oh God, I'm so ashamed. Then I told him what Lucy told me to say. I told him he would do it if he loved and trusted me enough. He still resisted. He said that I belonged to him and only him, and if I stop being only his, then I will not be his at all. Even if we stay together, we will only be sex partners. I thought I had found something to latch on to. He said that trust would be lost, that it was already damaged. And I said that my love for him is so strong that nothing can shake my faith in him. I thought our relationship was strong enough to handle this. Oh God, I whispered, feeling a chill run down my spine. He said it in the coldest tone I had ever heard him say. Until now, I thought so too. I think that's when I first started to think about quitting, but I just couldn't stop, you know. Sandra didn't answer. He said again that I belonged to him and him alone, and that once I ceased to be his, I would no longer belong to him. I was still going to argue, but he said the answer was no, and that the matter was closed. And he added that if he found out that I had already started something behind his back, it would ruin everything. But you've really already started something, haven't you? Sandra asked quietly. Yes, I whispered, trembling with sobs. Yes, I have already betrayed him. I was completely influenced by Lucy. I talked to her at work, and she convinced me to come back after her shift to come up with a plan to calm Joe. My God, how stupid I was. Should I make more tea? Sandra asked. Yes, please, Sandra. You were right. I shouldn't have drunk alcohol. While she was preparing tea, I collected my thoughts. Did all this really happen just a week ago? I followed Sandra into the kitchen. So, after work, I went to see Lucy. I hadn't been with her long when Shawn showed up. He started flirting with me, and I left. I sat in the car at her house for quite a long time. To be honest, I think I already realized that Lucy was just using me. I just didn't want to admit to myself how trusting I was. Still in denial, you know. When I got home, Joe looked drunk. He smelled bad, a mixture of alcohol and sweat. He had not changed his clothes. He was still in his work clothes. I was shocked. Joe almost never drinks, a maximum of a glass of wine with dinner. The last time he got drunk, he became so docile, pliable, open to suggestions, and I knew that he had drunk very little. The next day, he didn't remember anything. This reassured me. Then I was sure that at least I could force him to be kind to me again. And if I say something wrong, he may not remember. Yes, I fell for his manipulations. The trusting lady again swallowed his lies. It just shows how much better he knows me than I know him. I stopped as memories flashed before my eyes. He looked me straight in the eyes. His face expressed disgust and contempt. His voice was low, but full of aggression, almost a growl. He asked me again which of Lucy's lovers I wanted. I got angry. I couldn't even take off my coat. I had time. I demanded an explanation of why he continued to ask me this question. You never told me the truth. And then he added that I was a cheating woman of easy virtue and began to insult me. Me and Lucy. Then he mentioned my blonde Apollo, what's his name? I answered automatically, called Shawn's name. Then he exploded. He was drunk. I had to control the situation. But he asked question after question, throwing them at me like stones. I barely had time to react. Every word he said emphasized my stupidity, my thoughtlessness, and the implied contempt that I, as it turned out, had developed for him and our marriage. He, he made me confess what happened to Shawn, and then he ridiculed me for what Lucy and I were planning. He saw through everything. It stunned me. Lucy imagined it all as a fun adventure, but from his mouth it sounded disgusting. I felt disgusted because of Lucy, because of Brian and her sex toys, but most of all because of myself. He finally made his way to me. I realized what he had been telling me for months on end. I started telling him more about what the relationship was like between Brian and Shawn, but it only made him even angrier. I noticed that I was shaking again. I grabbed a cup of tea and took a big sip. It was cold, but I swallowed it anyway. And then he completely confused me. He started talking like he was ready to let me sleep with someone else. I said I wasn't sure, and he left to throw up, or so I thought. When he came back, he asked when I planned to become a girl of easy virtue. I was terrified. I wanted him to leave all this, so that he would understand that I don't want this anymore. But again and again, he called me a girl of easy virtue, a slut, and said that. I'll be alone. Lord, I knew he was right. I just wanted him to stop, to hug me, to forgive me, to understand that I was a fool. But he didn't touch me. He didn't calm me down. He just let me torture myself. My head started to spin again. I waited a bit for it to go away. Sandra squeezed my hands with hers. And then he suggested inviting Lucy, Shawn, and Brian to dinner to discuss the idea. He said he'd think about it after he'd listened to everyone. But he made me promise that, other than that dinner and maybe one meeting, I won't communicate with them. And he also said that I should quit my job. Damn. I suddenly remembered that I didn't even call to work today to ask for time off. I immediately grabbed the phone and did it. I hung up. I was amazed it must have shown on my face. "What's wrong, Debs?" asked Sandra. I was in a kind of daze. I heard her words and simply answered, bursting into tears again. Joe. Joe called in to work himself. He spoke to Dave and asked him to rescind my resignation. Dave told me to take a couple of days off and let me know if I needed more time. Oh, why was I so terrible? Why did I behave this way with my man? Why is he still so kind to me? Even now he cares about me. You were right before, Sandra said. If he didn't love you so much, he would have left a few weeks ago. I nodded, choking back tears. Sandra gave me some water to drink. She advised me to rest and went to the toilet. I think I heard her talking to someone, perhaps on the phone or walkie-talkie. I made new tea. Sandra returned when I was already pouring it into cups. I have news for you. Joe's police bail was extended. The assault charge against Shawn remains, but prosecutors have not yet decided whether to charge him with manslaughter. Unofficially, no one I've spoken to thinks it will go that far. As for the others, Lucy and Mark were remanded in custody pending trial. There are no charges against Shawn yet. I don't understand anything, I said, frowning. Don't worry about Mark and Lucy. They are in custody and will remain there if found guilty. It will be many years before they can be a threat to you again. Joe was charged with assaulting Shawn on Saturday morning, but due to the gun and the home invasion, it was decided not to press charges against Winston. Prosecutors still haven't made a final decision because, frankly, they probably doubt they can get a conviction, and going to court is too expensive. But of course, I didn't tell you that, Sandra added with a slight grin. What about Shawn? I asked. Unless Brian files a report, all we have is your word about the alleged threat on Friday. And even if Brian does, a good lawyer will claim that it was consensual, so it's basically nothing. We have no evidence that he broke any laws. I shuddered at these words. Shawn always seemed to be the one who controlled the situation. Even in those rare moments when I saw him, it was obvious. Lucy and Brian seemed to obey his will. Are you sure he wasn't responsible for those bastards showing up on Friday night? I asked, suddenly feeling afraid. There is no evidence that he is involved. Lucy and Mark both deny his involvement, Sandra replied. But Lucy threatened us when she left to take Shawn to the hospital. She said that this is not the end. I don't remember that being in your statements, Sandra frowned. I don't know what I said then, I replied sarcastically. At that moment, I was clearly not thinking well. Did you both hear her say that? Sandra clarified. I'm not sure, but Joe was closer to her than I was. He should have heard it, I answered thoughtfully. I'll ask him when he gets home. This shouldn't take long, right? I looked at my watch and suddenly realized how late it was. Damn, I didn't notice how much time had passed. I need to start cooking dinner. Yeah, no, he should be home in an hour or so, I said as I jumped up and started rummaging through the freezer. Will you join us? Unless, of course, you need to get back to someone. I don't feel comfortable eating in front of guests. That would be nice, but I don't want to get involved. I can talk to Joe and leave you alone. However, I would like you both to drop by the station to correct your remarks and answer a few questions. These are the questions I was originally going to ask you, Sandra said with a slight embarrassment. No, that's not a problem, and I think I'll appreciate the company, and Joe will probably want someone here so we don't have to talk to each other. Sandra seemed to gather her courage before continuing. You've been confessing to me all day. Now I have to confess to you. When I arrived this morning, I was planning to question you about the events of Friday night. When you opened the door, I would usually have warned you that you were being officially questioned and that the conversation was being recorded. But I didn't do it because you were clearly upset, and then I got distracted and forgot that my recorder was already on. I have everything you said on this device. I honestly think it would benefit Joe and your marriage if he heard this. But don't worry, since I didn't warn you, it can't be used in court. As soon as Joe hears your point of view, I will delete the post. Do you mind? Yes, I think so, if you think it will really help, I replied doubtfully. Yes, your remorse is obvious, as is the fact that you were manipulated by your so-called friend. I'm sure it won't do any harm. It's obvious that you care deeply about each other. For the first time in almost a week, I felt a glimmer of hope. I smiled tightly. We have sausages. I'll make them. Do you prefer mashed potatoes or fried potatoes? Anything will do for me, Sandra replied. Although, to be honest, I haven't had bangers and mash and beans in a while. Sausage and mash and beans, that means it will be so. The smile was sincere this time. I started preparing dinner when I suddenly heard Joe come in through the back door. I turned to him with a friendly smile, but it immediately disappeared. He just looked at me with a frown. Suppressing my sobs, I began peeling the potatoes again. Hello, he said, turning to Sandra. How can I help? Mr. Jones, I have questions about Friday night, but they can wait. I would like to talk to you about your wife and what she told me today. I didn't see how he did it, but I felt like daggers were stabbed into my back. He looked at me again with hostility. I need to wash up and change clothes. It can wait, he asked, taking off his shoes. There was no answer, but I heard him going upstairs. He hates me, doesn't he? I sobbed. No, I don't think so, Sandra replied. I think he's suffering and doesn't know how to deal with what you put him through. I think he is confused about what to do with you, your marriage, and himself. He's afraid of losing you, but the thought of what will happen if he stays also scares him. I bent over, bursting into tears, my hair falling into the bowl of water. I felt a calming hand on my shoulder. I guess she lied to you about how I didn't understand her, Joe said with contempt. Well, it's true. I don't understand a damn thing about it at all. I don't understand anything at all. I turned to look at him and heard in his voice, as he finished his words, that his eyes began to shine, filling with tears. He turned away from us and almost ran out of the kitchen. Sandra followed him a few seconds later. I heard them talking in the living room. By the time Sandra returned, the potatoes were already boiling and the sausages were on the grill. He's listening now, she told me. When I served dinner, Sandra went to tell him everything was ready. She came back and said that he wanted to eat alone in the living room. She brought him food. At dinner, I wanted to continue my story. Sandra said that we could kill two birds with one stone. She had a rough picture from our testimony, but she wanted to clarify a couple of points. She formally warned me and wrote down her questions and my answers in a notebook. So, what happened when your guests arrived? I greeted them and offered everyone something to drink. When I asked Brian what he wanted, Shawn told me he couldn't drink anything. I offered a soft drink, but Shawn answered me very sharply. Don't you understand that he can't drink anything? This really made me angry. Normally, I would immediately kick out anyone who disrespected me in my home, but Joe and I agreed after our argument. After he convinced me of what I should have known from the start. I had certain things that needed to be done to make Joe's plan work. So you're saying it was a trap? No, not really, at least not in the way you think. We'll get back to this. Tell me what happened before Joe came home. Nothing really. I left them in the living room to get everything ready for dinner. Lucy came to me and started telling me how much fun I'd have later when I slept with Shawn. I tried to explain to her that this was not what the evening was for, but she didn't listen. When Joe arrived, he greeted me with a kiss and completely ignored Lucy when she tried to kiss him. I saw how angry it made her. Did he provoke her on purpose? No, he was just being himself. He has a strong personal sense of morality, his own perception of what is right and what is wrong. He knew enough about Lucy to know that he didn't want to talk to her any more than necessary, and he certainly wasn't going to kiss her. What happened next? He came into the living room to say hello and then went upstairs to wash up and change. Did you hear any talking or arguing before he went upstairs? I felt my face turn red. I was afraid I might hurt Joe. Sandra looked at me carefully. Hesitantly, I said, I heard Joe insisting that Brian have a drink. Then the music started playing, and then Shawn complained that he was watching something. And Joe told him that no one, as he put it, was going to watch Noel fucking Edmonds on his TV. I smiled. He really hates Noel Edmonds. Then I heard Joe go upstairs, and I heard Shawn scolding Brian for taking the drink. I'm not sure, but it seems Shawn took it from him and drank it himself. What happened when Joe came down? Nothing special. He came into the living room. I didn't hear any conversation, nothing at all, but he turned up the volume of the music a little. After half an hour or so, I asked Lucy to invite them over while I set the table with appetizers. Shawn tried to sit next to me, but I discussed everything with Lucy in advance. I told her that Joe was insistent, and if things didn't go the way he wanted, the evening would be over. How did Shawn react to this? Restrained, but he didn't like it. He liked to control everything, and Joe didn't allow that. Sandra continued to ask, and I answered in detail until we were done. What did you talk about at dinner? Well, at first it was the usual dinner party nonsense, polite conversation about nothing. Then, after a few drinks, Lucy forced us to get to the point of the evening to what it was all intended for. After a few glasses, that is, everyone drank. Well, yeah, but like I said earlier, Joe doesn't drink much, but he's a master at pretending to be drunk. I don't understand this. Why is he doing this? This is, of course, stupid, but I saw how it works. Have you ever seen the Drunken Master movies? These are action movies where the hero has to be drunk to fight. So, Joe loves this idea. He believes that if someone thinks that you are drunk, really drunk, then they stop seeing you as a threat and lose their vigilance. It's stupid, but I've seen him win fights like that against much bigger opponents. They thought he was completely passed out, but he outplayed them. He beat me verbally the other day, and I know it's working for him. You say he has a lot of fights. Is he an aggressive person? Is Joe aggressive? God, no. He only fights when he feels a threat to himself or his loved ones. What happened when Lucy, as you say, got to the point? Joe started asking them about everything. The reasons, the details, the history, and the development. Lucy seemed proud of herself, Brian looked very awkward, and Shawn just smirked at me. This still makes me feel uneasy. Then, when Joe asked what they usually do in situations like tonight, everything changed dramatically. How exactly has it changed? Well, first of all, on the positive side, it gave Brian a boost. His eyes lit up. Shawn had a very different expression on his face, shocked and disappointed. She and Lucy exchanged glances with each other and Joe until Lucy began to stammer, trying to explain that she thought we were all going to play together, so to speak. I smiled, remembering how insecure and awkward Lucy had looked when her plans failed. Then she offered Shawn to show us everything, but Joe besieged her. God, how proud I am of him. He said he needed to get to know a person better than just say hello before he said, "Please take my wife." And then he added, I giggled, remembering, especially with someone who likes the way Noel fucks Edmonds. Sandra laughed along with me, repeating, Noel Bloody Edmonds. After that, Joe asked Brian directly what he was getting out of all this. Brian couldn't really answer. Lucy started to speak up for him, but Joe pushed, and eventually Lucy, in her twisted way, assured us that Brian wasn't getting anything out of it at all. Joe excused himself, saying he needed to go to the bathroom, and in his absence, Shawn began instructing Brian on what he should tell Joe when he returned. Do you know what's strange? Shawn didn't care what I might think about what he said to Brian or what I might tell Joe about it. It seemed like my thoughts and feelings were completely unimportant to him. I felt a chill as I realized that to Shawn I would just be a fuck toy, and even that wasn't enough for him. His real passion was not sex, but power, control, and humiliation of those he used. His main goal is the subjugation of men. When Joe returned, Brian tried to repeat the text he had memorized, but couldn't. Poor guy. Then Lucy finished for him. After that, Brian apologized and said that he wanted to go to the toilet, but did not move until Lucy gave permission. Joe turned to Shawn and asked how he met Lucy and Brian. According to our plan, I went to complete one of the tasks. I left the room, met Brian upstairs, and gave him the money. As it turned out, he was not allowed to have his own. We listened for the taxi I knew Joe had ordered to arrive. When we heard it drive up, we quietly went downstairs and I let it out of the house. I remember it was very cold outside and a gust of frosty air blew through the door as he was leaving. I waited in the corridor for a couple of minutes and then returned to the others. What did you see when you returned? Joe was in full swing. He staggered around, spoke in a drunken voice, and began to disparage their so-called open marriage. He told Lucy that she did not have a real marriage, and in the end called her a dirty girl of easy virtue for people like Shawn, and added that they were both worthless creatures who spat on the person to whom they owe everything. Then he told them to get out and never come to our house again. Shawn jumped up. I thought he was going to attack Joe right there, but it turned out worse. He told Joe that I had been sleeping with him for weeks. He lied. This is a lie. I didn't do this. Never. He made it all up. Really, Sandra, I didn't do it. It's not true. Please believe me. Make Joe believe. I fell face down on the dirty plate, bursting into tears, and buried my face in my hands. I believe you, darling. I raised my head and looked at the doorway. Joe stood there, looking at me. Tears were streaming down his face. Are you serious? I asked, uncertainty, taking a step towards him. Yes, after what I heard here. He picked up Sandra's recording device, and what you've said in the last few minutes. You couldn't hear all this, I almost whispered, closing the distance between us. I've heard enough to know that it's not entirely your fault, but it'll take us a while to straighten things out, if that's even possible. Do you two mind if I join you? I don't want to be alone. We can continue tomorrow if that suits you, Sandra suggested. Joe and I looked at each other and both nodded. Yes, I'll come by tomorrow, if possible, I said. Okay, see you tomorrow. Remember what I said, Joe. I looked at him and he nodded. We saw her off together and I tried to hug Joe, but he tensed and said, Sorry, honey, I need to think about this. You should have listened to me. Of course, Joe. When you're ready, may I know what Sandra said? Yeah, nothing special, just that you're a stupid bitch. My face darkened. All the hope I had disappeared at that moment. How could she give me false hope? Oh, and that you love me and couldn't be more sorry. But the problem is that I already know that, and frankly, that's what makes everything worse. I don't know what to do next, honey. I really don't. We agreed on this. I had no idea either. We stood like two idols for some time. I didn't tell Sandra a lot of what we did, nothing too explicit. I know, he answered briefly, somehow distantly. I'm worried about telling her about, the fire. Did you mention this in your initial statement on Friday? No, I was too upset. It all had to do with those people who broke in and what happened afterwards until we escaped. Can you lie for me? He asked, his voice cold. Anything for you, I replied. Anger appeared on his face for a moment. I can imagine what flashed through his head. Either anything but not listen to me when I'm trying to save our marriage. Don't mention it, he said again without emotion. What? I frowned, trying to understand him. Don't mention the fire, vodka, he clarified. I don't understand. Don't talk about it voluntarily and deny it if asked directly. His voice was cold again, which worried me. Why? I don't understand. For now, just because I ask you, is this not enough? This time there was some urgency and slight irritation in his voice. Yes, of course, that's enough. Tomorrow I'll take Jack to work and leave him there. First I will talk to that woman, you listen, and when she talks to you, confirm what I tell her. Can you do this for me? I'll try, I replied, hoping I could. His face expressed distrust of me. I asked him to explain everything again. What I say will be absolutely true, but it will not be the whole truth. I'll tell her that he attacked me and I defended myself, but I won't mention the fireball trick, and like everyone else, it never happened. Okay, honey, I said softly, afraid to upset him even more. Not because I was afraid of him, I just didn't want him to be in even more pain. He didn't answer. I looked back, he was no longer there. I heard the TV turn on and sighed with relief. I put away the dishes after dinner and went to him. He sat watching Drunken Master again, the old movie. He ignored me. I saw traces of dried tears on his face. God, what have I done? I don't want forgiveness, damn it, I don't deserve it. All I want is for him to be happy again. How can I do this? The movie ended and he went to bed, just like that. No, good night, no, see you later. I would have cried, but I had nothing left to cry about. I sat and looked at the turned-off TV screen for I don't know how long. I went over different scenarios in my head over and over again. None of them gave me a way out. I even thought about committing suicide, but that would only relieve me of the pain, not his. Finally, I went to the bedroom, and as soon as I opened the door, I realized that he was still awake. You could hear it in his breathing. In a whisper, I asked if I could join him. He didn't answer, but I saw how he tensed. Now I didn't know what to do, but I decided that since we'd slept together the last few nights, tonight would be fine. I undressed and went to bed. I wanted to hug him, but I felt like he wasn't ready yet, and it made me wonder if he'd ever be ready again, at least with me. I shuddered at the thought. I don't know which of us fell asleep first, but when we woke up, we hugged. It was so good, how could I even think about giving it all up? Because I'm a fucking idiot, that's why. I think my sobs woke him up. At first he pressed me tighter, then he probably remembered. He slid out of bed, not roughly, but not gracefully either. He gave me a look full of hatred and went into the bathroom. I cried while he was in the shower. I don't think I've ever felt so alone. Joe left as usual in the morning. I remembered that he would return, and I decided that when he returned, I would talk to him, even if he didn't want to. He returned and immediately went to the computer. I sat still, wondering if I should try to start a conversation. The computer quickly booted up, and a second later my voice came out of the speakers. He took a copy from Sandra's recorder, probably via USB. I tried to talk to him, but he just gave me a look of contempt and turned his attention back to the recording. He clicked on the file, fast-forwarding, probably to a point he had not yet listened to. Click. Angry at myself even more because she was right. I can't explain it. It was disgusting, I was terrified, but at the same time so excited. I went home immediately after that, pretending to be sick. Click. He said it in the coldest tone I've ever heard. Until now, I believed too. I think that was the first time I thought about giving up everything, but I couldn't just leave everything like that, right? I couldn't hold back my tears listening to my own voice. Click. Still here this morning. I don't want to live anymore. I don't think I deserve it. I ran out of the room, trembling, stopped in the kitchen, and stared at the floor. Unbidden thoughts entered my head. What happened? What could have happened? Nothing good. I pulled myself together and made tea. I poured a cup for Joe and took it to him. I placed the cup next to him as my humiliating words continued to be heard from the speakers, one after another, like hammer blows, reminding me of the pain that months of stupidity had brought me. I could hardly hold back my sobs. Thank you. It sounded forced. It was difficult for him to say, but for me, they were the most beautiful words in the world. I wanted to rush to him, hug him, but I was afraid that he would push me away. Click. To stop it, I didn't want it anymore, but again and again he called me a girl of easy virtue, a slut, and said that I would be left alone. Damn it, I knew he. Click. The room was filled with silence. Only my breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears could be heard. I looked at Joe. He was sitting looking at me. I ruined everything, Joe. I never did anything, but I ruined everything, badly, irrevocably. I have no excuses, not even these pathetic excuses that are on the record. I let this bitch brainwash me and ruin everything, you and me. I cried without tears. They had long since dried up. But what's worse than all the intrigue, all this conspiracy, worse than the fact that I didn't hear you, didn't hear how you tried to save us. The worst thing is that I didn't even think about your pain until I felt my poor one, what I did to you, what I put you through, what I continue to do to you. I ruined us, Joe, didn't I? Everything you said about trust. It's gone. You can never trust me again, and I don't deserve it. Joe, I don't deserve you. Yes, Deborah, you ruined everything. You're right, you've destroyed us. You've destroyed my trust in you. But that trust has disappeared because you have stopped trusting me. As far as I know, I have never given you reason to doubt me or anything. But you continued your game, you didn't believe me, and you believed that damn bitch to get a convenient alibi for cheating. You said on that tape that you didn't want to do it anymore, but you kept pushing me, right? So how the hell can I believe that? How? Are you saying that you are feeling pain now? Well, I'm sorry, but I did everything I could to prevent the pain you're experiencing right now. I've tried, and you know I've tried. You feel the pain of not being understood, of the fact that your best friend, whom you thought you would be with for the rest of your life, no longer trusts you. Well, just know I've been living with it for a few months now, and it's not getting any easier. He took a deep breath. I also want to forget everything and move on, just like you. I'm just not sure I have the strength to do it. I cringed. I couldn't defend myself. I had no arguments. He was right. The consequences of my actions left us both with no choice. Perhaps the best thing I could do was leave, but it should be his decision. I looked down at the floor and muttered, I will never make any decisions for us again. I will do everything to make us one again. I'm sorry. I will never be able to fix everything. I will never be able to heal the wounds. We were interrupted by a loud knock on the back door. These guys came to replace our broken door and frame. Joe could have done this himself, but he ordered a steel door frame to be fabricated and installed by a local company. We had just dealt with them, and then Sandra pulled up. I made everyone a cup of tea. As the men began working on the door, Sandra, Joe, and I locked ourselves in the kitchen to talk. As soon as we sat down, Sandra began. Today, we will do everything according to the rules. I don't need the details and backstory you told me yesterday, Debs. We'll do it officially, so I'll ask questions to see what I need. But before I begin, before I warn you, I will say that I am forbidden to tell you about any statements that may have been made against you by other people. So I'm not going to tell you about the allegations that you organized, provoked, and attacked Mr. Shawn Derby in your kitchen using something that looked like a flamethrower. Nor will I tell you that if this attack does happen and is confirmed, we may be forced to delve into the investigation into the death of Mr. Winston White. But I will tell you to heed the warning. Do you both understand everything I've just said? She looked at both of us in turn until we confirmed it. Then she opened her bag, took out a cassette recorder with 2 cassette compartments, unwound the wire with the microphone, and put it between us. She then took out 2 new cassette tapes, inserted them into the tape recorder, and took out an A4 notebook to record. I must conduct this in private, so please remain absolutely silent while I interview the other. Joe, I'll start with you. Sandra extended her hand, asking if he was ready. He nodded, and she pressed the record button. She said the date, time, her name and rank, and then Joe's name. Mr. Jones, do you understand that this interview is being recorded? You are not currently charged with a crime. We consider you to be assisting in the investigation. You don't have to say anything. However, if an admission of crime is made, it may affect your defense if you fail to mention something during questioning that you later rely on in court. Anything you say can be used as evidence. Yes. Did you have dinner at your home last Friday? I wouldn't call it dinner, but we had guests for dinner. Can you name who was present? Yes, Brian McGarrett, his wife Lucy, and their friend Shawn. Was it Shawn Derby? Maybe. No one called him by his last name until you mentioned it. Are these your friends? More like wives. I've met Brian and Lucy a few times. Lucy works with my wife. I had never seen Shawn before Friday. Was there any special reason for this meeting? Yes, these 3 were up to some weird sexual thing. They wanted to get us involved, and they were pressuring Debs, my wife, to join. Oh yeah, and to help Brian escape. You say pressed. Can you explain what you mean? Also, what does it mean to help Brian escape? Lucy constantly told Debs about this and organized meetings with Shawn. She even got Brian to lie to her and tell her how much he liked what they were doing to him. How did you know that he lied? He told me. We agreed to meet secretly last week. He confessed everything to me, including how he ruined their plans, that is, Lucy and Shawn, by foiling their attempt to seduce Debs. He said what started out as fun had turned into a sick perversion in which he had no choice. He was basically their prisoner, and they forced him to do all sorts of perverted sexual things. Okay, Sandra said, making a note on a separate sheet of paper. What can you tell us about sexy things? I'd rather not think about it, thank you. Is it bad enough that you decided to help Brian, even though he was part of the whole thing? Yes, not that he had a choice. Fine. Tell me what happened before, during, and after he left. Well, at first we had to wait until Shawn and Lucy were really drunk so they could relax. Then, ostensibly going to the bathroom, I called a taxi for Brian, booked it for 10 minutes, and told the driver not to knock. When I came back, Brian went to the bathroom, and I distracted them with conversations. Debs went upstairs, hoping they wouldn't notice her. She let him out through the quiet door. If he went through the main door, he would have to slam the door. After he left, I told them that we would not participate in what they wanted. What happened next? When Shawn realized that Brian had left, he went crazy. He started screaming, trying to piss me off. When that didn't work, he went crazy and attacked me. I defended myself. How exactly did you defend yourself? I hit him with my fist. You hit him with your fist. And something else? No, not really. You didn't use any weapons? No. And what? Can you explain how Mr. Derby got his burns? Burns. Are we really talking about the same person? Are you saying that when Mr. Derby left your house on Friday night, he was fine? Yes, the man who was introduced to me as Shawn left with a couple of bruises on his face and a very bruised ego. I don't know anything about any burns. So there was no flamethrower. What about flaming vodka? Is this possible? I didn't think it would burn so easily. Sandra said nothing and slowly nodded her head. I wasn't sure if this meant she agreed that vodka was flammable, or if she was implying that Joe had answered correctly. She asked the following question. Were there any threats when they left? Lucy said it's not over yet. I didn't take it as a threat then. What happened then? Debs and I had just finished clearing the dishes from dinner and were sitting in the living room to talk about everything that had happened when the door opened with a bang. It was Lucy and 2 others in her company. They had weapons. They threatened us, said that they would take advantage of us, and if we did not do what they wanted, one of us would be shot. What happened next? The white guy and Lucy went upstairs. Another, who was later found dead, had a gun. He grabbed Debs and put a gun to her head. He made her go upstairs and told me to follow them. When Debs stopped at the bottom of the stairs and he pushed her, I had an idea of how to get out of this situation. What idea? We used to use the safe word in sex games. A safe word means stop because words like no or enough can be ignored. I thought that if I said a safe word, Debs would hear and he would push her again. So when she was closer to the top of the stairs, I said a safe word. She stopped, he pushed her, and when she leaned forward, I grabbed him, pulled him back, and fell to my knees. He lost his balance and fell down the stairs. I grabbed Debs and we ran out of the house, jumped into the car, and drove to the police station. Did you know at that moment that Mr. White was dead? No. Thank you, Mr. Jones. I watched as Sandra looked at her watch and said, the interview ended at 12:07. She took both cassettes out of the tape recorder, signed them, put them in 2 identical envelopes, and signed them too. Please read this, she said, handing Joe the sheets of her notes. If you think that everything is correct, sign below where I marked. I'll put the kettle on, she added. She then repeated the process with me. I confirmed Joe's story, but she almost caught me off guard with one question. Perhaps she would have, but she shook her head as she spoke. Do you have surgical alcohol or white spirit in your house? My face turned red when I said no. It wasn't a lie, though I did remember Joe pouring a nearly full bottle of alcohol down the sink as we cleaned on Friday. Then I wondered why he did it. Now I think I do. The bottle ended up in the trash can, which was supposed to be taken out this afternoon. After I signed my application and Sandra gathered all her things, she turned to Joe and said, You know, Joe, I understand that this is none of my business, and perhaps I shouldn't say this. But let's be honest. I feel like I know you both better now than probably your closest friends. You had a better chance of forgiving Deb's mistake on Friday, at least when you were still talking. And now you are both waiting for one of you to take the first step to fix everything, so that everything will disappear by itself. But that doesn't happen. You need to decide whether you want to repair your relationship and move on or not. It won't be easy. You both will have to go through a long and difficult path. But remember, you are victims, and if you don't even try, then these bastards have already won. I looked at Joe, and he nodded slightly. I burst into tears, ran to him, and hugged him. His arms slowly wrapped around me, and then he started crying too, holding me tighter. We stood for a long time, hugging each other, and then began to apologize to each other. I think this was the first step towards our recovery. I will always be grateful to Sandra. She was right. We can't let these bastards win. Sandra's words echoed in my head. She was wrong. Perhaps her intentions were good, and I wanted to believe in them, but they had already won. I knew this because what Joe and I had was gone. Nevertheless, I approached him. He opened his arms, and I threw myself into them, burying myself in his chest, bursting into tears. Joe hugged me tightly. He cried too. We both cried at the loss. I knew he couldn't trust me anymore. I felt it, and it seems he did too. Sandra quietly left without saying another word. She closed the door behind her so as not to disturb us. I looked after her as her silhouette disappeared from view. The tears dried up and were replaced by a feeling of emptiness. His hugs, instead of comforting me, made me feel closed off, as if I was trapped in a cage. My eyes darted around the room, subconsciously looking for an excuse to let Joe go. Fortunately, an excuse was found in the form of a doorbell. These were the workers who had finished installing the door. They wanted me to check their work and sign the papers. I did what was required, adding 30 pounds each as a tip. Not much, but that's all I had on hand. When we had the house again, we tried to talk. But there were no words. Too many emotions. The wounds are too fresh and deep. Debs desperately wanted to hug me, to touch me in some way. I knew she needed it to feel safe again. But I didn't have such an opportunity. Her touch did not bring me peace. I can't say it hurt, but it was close. Every time she tried to touch me, I pushed her away. We spent the rest of the day in the same vein. I tried to distract myself with TV, but as luck would have it, there was some kind of cheater on every one of my favorite shows. Even The Simpsons seemed too close to reality. In the end, I gave up on it and went to bed. Debs joined me. She tried to relax me, perhaps seduce me, but I again felt disgusted by her touch and pushed her away. I don't think either of us slept well. This was the third night in a row. She was still in bed when I left for work. I think it was easier for both of us to be apart. At work, Jack turned out to be a real find. His cheerful disposition and silly jokes gave me a respite from the chaos that was going on at home. After work, I dropped him off and decided to try again. Sandra was right about one thing. Unless we both tried, it wouldn't work. I really wanted to try it. I let Debs hug me and kiss me. Told her about my day, asked about hers. Everything was going well, but as soon as we finished discussing the events of the day, there was another awkward silence. In bed, I didn't push her away, but I couldn't touch her myself. She tried to bring me back to the moment, trying to show her affection and desire. For a moment, I even felt pleasant, but as soon as she changed her position to a closer one, I looked at her lips, her gaze, and how the feelings of love and attraction were combined in that moment. I tried to concentrate, but Shawn's words were still ringing in my head. "Your girl is ready. I know it. I've seen her for weeks." These words echoed in my head, undermining my calm and causing irritation. "What happened, dear?" she asked, noticing that I had pulled away. I sighed heavily and said, "I'm sorry, honey, but the words that man said just can't get out of my head," and ruined the moment. She looked ashamed, her eyes lowered to the bed. I I didn't do this. You have to believe me." "He lied, honey." Her voice was scared, broken. "Really, you have to trust me." I turned away from her and lay down, feeling her pain from my rejection. For a long time, I heard her quiet sobs. Evil, chaotic thoughts rushed through my head. Lies, betrayal. Did she have other lovers? Was she a girl of easy virtue? My pain, coercion, and much more. Every thought tormented my psyche with poisonous visions, reminding me of what happened and what almost happened. I eventually fell asleep, trying not to think about Deborah and Shawn and all this damn chaos. On Thursday, she gave me pleasure. Nothing extra, no attempt to get something in return. Sometimes random thoughts would appear and disrupt my concentration. In the end, her efforts were rewarded. "You needed this," she said, pulling away. The next morning I woke up, and for the first time in a long time, she had her arms wrapped around me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel uncomfortable about it. She pressed herself against me, and I smiled again, for the first time in a long time. The next evening, I would like to say that things were a little better, but after we talked and had dinner, I felt uneasy again. I breathed a sigh of relief when the doorbell rang. Deborah opened it. Jack and his brother Paul entered. They wanted to take me to the pub for a lad's night out, as they said. I looked at Deborah, and she nodded. They took me not to my local pub or their usual place, but to a secluded pub known as the Bitch Underpants, or according to the sign outside, the White Horse. It was a bad pub, which explained why it was practically empty on a Friday night. We sat at a corner table next to a crackling open fire. Honestly, it was the only good thing about this pub. Paul looked at me as we sat down. "Well, lay it out," he said. "What? You know perfectly well that. Why was there a dead man at your house? What the hell is going on? Did you kill him? And why?" "I would prefer not to talk about it," I replied. "I thought we were here to have a good time." "Nobody. We know something is wrong, and we want to help," Paul said. "I can't tell you, it's too personal," I replied, looking into my mug. "Listen, maybe I'm not the smartest, but you and I have been working for almost 2 years, and everyone knows that if it weren't for you, who gave me a chance, I would definitely be sitting now," Jack said with sincerity in his voice. "I know something happened, and I know it's something shitty." He was right. I gave him the job and then interceded for him in court at Paul's request. It worked. Jack stopped hanging out with the trash that got him into trouble and soon realized who they were before almost all of them were locked up. He turned his life upside down. No illegal substances except light smoking, no car thefts or dealing in dubious things. He was also right that it was terrible. Should I translate further? It has something to do with this guy Brian and his wife, right? Asked Paul. I stared at him in shock. How does he know this? I was at Three Feathers at lunchtime. I met my friend Jerry. He is also a firefighter. And then your wife comes in with some woman. It was this Brian's wife. I didn't know her, but Jerry did. They didn't notice us when they sat down at the table behind us, where the booths are. Well, I overheard what they were talking about. Some kind of cruelty about sick sexual things. I thought, no, this is not about Joe. He won't do that. Never. And then when I heard that this man was dead at your house, I realized that it was somehow connected. Paul said. Jack interrupted him. And then he comes to me and asks what your problems are. I told him how nervous you were before this dinner and how you barely talked about Debs at all. Usually you don't shut up about her, always Debs this, Debs that. Then we realized that something had happened. For God's sake, Joe, tell me you didn't give your wife pleasure, pardon the expression, after another man. No, mate, as Paul said, not now, not ever, I replied. I told them everything. How Lucy tried to drag Debs and me into her dirty games. How she wanted to turn me into a humiliated husband, just like Brian. How I thwarted their plans, and how Lucy and her accomplices broke into my house to get their way by force. Damn, this is really tough, Paul said when I finished. Jack seemed lost for the first time in his life. Finally, he found his voice. You can't get by with kicks here, especially with this Shawn. I nodded in agreement. The brothers looked at each other and Paul stood up. The same? He asked, collecting our empty mugs. I nodded again. What are you going to do with Debs? Divorce? Asked Jack. Good question, I replied. I thought about it. I used to think we had something special until all this happened. I don't know if we can get it back. I looked at him, then at Paul at the counter, then around the room, trying not to say any more. But Jack didn't give up. But you're going to try, he said. Can you trust her again? If not, then maybe it's time to stop. Damn, this guy is wiser than his years. I started to answer when Paul returned with the drinks. You're right, I said, stumbling as Paul appeared. But as far as I know, she really didn't do anything. Well, except for letting that crap fill her head with that crap. The fact is that she still refrained from acting. She wouldn't do it. Until she got me involved, even though it was a sick idea. I picked up my mug and took a long sip. I think it's worth a try at least for this, I said, draining my mug and heading to the toilet. When I returned, Jack attacked me again. So Mark and Lucy are in prison and Brian and Shawn are walking around free. Do you know their full names or addresses? Do you have a photo? No, just Brian and Lucy. Wait, Shawn's last name is Derby. I think his wife's name is Karen, I replied, remembering Sandra's interrogation. And that other guy is Mark King. Jack picked up the phone and started writing something. No addresses, he asked. Only at Brian's, I said. His look made me tell. I did this, but added, he seemed to be planning to sell the house and move. Jack nodded, still busy with the phone. Paul returned with a new mug for me, and the brothers exchanged glances. Jack nodded almost imperceptibly, and Paul smiled widely. I looked at them in bewilderment. You didn't kick her out? Not going to? Asked Paul. Damn it, is this going to go on all night? I was just discussing this with Jack. No, I said, shaking my head sadly. I don't think she did anything, at least not physically. I know that he crossed the line once, for which he would have received a punch in the face if I had seen it, but not enough to warrant a divorce. You are sure? He asked. I was suddenly overcome with fear. Did he know something that I didn't know? Did I believe another lie? Why, what did you hear? I asked sharply. No, nothing like that. On the contrary, What I heard confirms your words. Debs said she won't put any more pressure on you and that she doesn't need anyone else. But what finally convinced me was hearing this other woman, Lucy, tell her that if she just tried, she would never regret it. Debs replied that she didn't want to hear anything like that anymore and lost her temper, stormed out of the pub. Paul took a sip from his mug. I just wanted to make sure you knew what you wanted, so you can be sure, really confident. I understood what he meant. It would have been easier perhaps for both of us to say, enough is enough, blame her, and call it a day. Sandra's words rang through my head. If you don't even try, then those bastards have already won. She was right. Yes, I fought a long, hard fight and won that fight, but I wasn't going to let them win the next one. If they win just one battle, they will win the whole war. I clutched the mug tightly, looking into it, and felt the anger growing inside me. I tried to calm down, but then Paul leaned over and whispered, I know one person who can solve your problems. 1,000 for each, and it's all over. I looked at him, shocked at what he had just suggested. Am I ready to go that far? Will I be able to live with this later? If you don't have money, I can pay in advance. You'll return it later, he added. I shook my head slowly, determined to figure it out on my own. If I don't succeed, I can always go back to this option. He shrugged. Let me know if you change your mind, he said, and looked up when Jack returned. Have you seen that comedian, Jim Jeffries? I have a DVD of it at home. I can borrow it if you want. It's bloody funny, Paul said. My anger began to dissipate as I noticed Paul deliberately changing the subject. Is this some kind of subtle way to change the subject? I noted with a grin, realizing that the serious conversation was over. After that, everything turned into the evening I had hoped for. Jokes, gossip, mutual jokes, and fun. For someone who doesn't usually drink much, I drank quite a bit. When it was time to close, I insisted on walking home, saying I needed to think. After some arguing, they said goodbye and left me alone. After checking the fence on the street, I began the 4-mile walk home. Lost in thought, I didn't notice how I found myself in front of my door, more sober than I was when leaving the pub. Gathering my courage, I reached for the handle and, opening the door, entered. Despite the alcohol, I felt a wave of anxiety when I crossed the threshold. Debs was sitting in the living room, the TV was on, and she looked at me. I noticed that she was crying. I was afraid that you wouldn't come back. Did you have a good time? She asked. Yes, I answered. Maybe you should meet your friends. That probably wasn't the right thing to say because she burst into tears. I reacted without thinking, as a loving husband should do, and went over to comfort her. I can't. Yesterday I went shopping and she began to cry even more. I hugged her and we hugged each other. I saw him, she said through tears. No secrets, remember, I was gently reminded. I didn't know how to tell you. But don't worry, I told him, and he knew I was serious. No secrets, dear. This was not planned. I just ran into him by chance. It was planned, but not by you. Believe me, we haven't seen the last of him yet. Why won't he leave us alone? Because he's a sick bastard, that's all. Can't the police do anything? She asked, pulling away and looking at me. Probably not, I answered, looking into her eyes. Sandra was right. I thought they had already won, but they only captured part of the territory. We won the first battle. We need to make sure they don't win anything else, and we can only do that if we stick together. I would kill those bastards if I could. Every single one of them. At least we agreed with this. I broke our no secrets rule and didn't tell her about the relevant conversation with Paul and Jack, even though that conversation helped me understand the situation better. Later, we made love. Although it's difficult to call it love, it was the beginning of a possible reconciliation. The next day, a letter arrived calling for an investigation, the decision of which would determine whether I would be held accountable for the death of Winston White. Over the next few weeks, things gradually began to improve between us. Although the upcoming investigation distracted us from other problems, we were both worried about the possible outcome. Debs, rightly, blamed herself for this, although she was not considered guilty. Sandra came by several times to support us, reassuring us that the police had little evidence that this was anything other than an accident. Her words, not mine. A week before the investigation, Debs returned to work. She was uncomfortable for the first few days, but with the support of her bosses, Peter and Dave, she began to adapt. It seemed like normal life was about to return. On Friday afternoon, I noticed Jack looking at his phone. He looked worried and approached me. "Go meet Debs after work." I looked at him, about to ask why, but he sharply shouted, "Go now and hurry up." I looked at him one more time, then walked down the stairs, jumped into my van, and drove to the D&P insurance office where Debs worked. I avoided the main roads, choosing less congested streets, but still drove quickly, ignoring the phone that was ringing incessantly. The parking lot was almost empty, only 4 cars. One was ours, plus a Bentley and an Aston that belonged to Peter and Dave, and one more. I knew who it belonged to. I recognized this car as soon as I pulled into the parking lot. The last time I saw her was in the driveway. It belonged to a certain Mr. Derby. A loud scream showed me where he was. Debs hadn't come out yet. It looked like he was waiting for her. "You little freak, have you come to see my prostitute before I have sex with her properly?" he shouted as I stepped out of the van. I understood that I had to restrain myself. Cameras were recording us. I paused to think of an answer. "I've already seen her," I answered. "But you shouldn't call her a girl of easy virtue, although, given what she said about you, this is probably fair." He hesitated for a second, and I continued to provoke him, moving towards him. "By the way, I love the new sheets. They fit well into the interior. Sorry about the stains, but you know what Karen is like when she gets upset. I wish I could stay longer, but you know, I always feel awkward around your kids, even though they say how much they like me." His confusion turned to rage. Redness began to rise up his neck to his ears, making the fresh scars on his face appear almost white in comparison. "Tell me, does she always experience such emotions during other types of sex, or is it just with me? Just wondering because she still looks embarrassed even though it's been months." I saw Debs leave the building with Peter and Dave. They paused at the door briefly while Peter locked it. Shawn hadn't noticed them yet, but he was clearly ready to explode. I kept winding it up. "Judging by her words, you are not as gifted as you and Lucy boasted. Don't worry, she only told me that because I mentioned how tight she was." His fist hit me square in the jaw. Although I expected the blow and tried to deflect, it still hit well and the blow was strong. I fell to the ground and he rushed towards me, trying to kick me, shouting, "How did such an insignificant freak like you cope with Winston and Mark?" I just started to get up when 2 men grabbed him. Debs, holding the phone in her hand, spoke quickly and intensely. When I got to my feet, Shawn was pinned against the van. A few minutes later, a police car arrived. The police began taking preliminary statements. All 3 who witnessed the situation supported me. No one heard me quietly provoking Shawn. They only saw him become aggressive and hit me for no apparent reason. Naturally, I added that he said that after what happened to the people he and Lucy sent to deal with me and Debs, more would come for us. When I said this, Shawn started screaming again, threatening to take revenge on me for setting me up. In the end, the blow to the jaw turned out to be a real gift. It only made his situation worse. Shawn was taken to the station where he was charged. Peter and Dave agreed to give full testimony the next day. Debs and I decided to do the same. Then we left, following the policeman's advice to go to the hospital. Some might blame it on bureaucracy or immigration, I don't know which. But one thing is for sure, unless you have an emergency, there will be a lot of waiting for you in the hospital. I went through the standard NHS procedure: examination, x-ray, diagnosis. I was sent home with a handful of painkillers that seemed to be more painful to swallow than they relieved the pain. All in all, it would have been a waste of a Friday night, but it was more than worth it for me. The next morning, at 8:30, Jack and Paul were already knocking on the door. Debs opened it for them in her robe. I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee through a straw. Debs showed them to the room and went to get dressed. They started making fun of me when they saw me drinking through a straw, but quickly stopped talking when they noticed that I was really in pain. They brought that DVD, Paul said, holding out the box, as an excuse for his arrival. I took the disc, but it didn't save me from 20 questions. Once I assured them that everything was fine, except for the pain in my jaw, they began to ask more about the previous evening, interspersing questions with jokes. It was painful for me to talk, so I endured their teasing and waited for Debs to join. She told them about yesterday's events. Surprisingly, Debs realized that her presence was not required and decided to leave us boys to talk alone. She started getting ready to go shopping. Before he left, Jack showed me a message he had received the day before, a lurk at B. Paul will tell you, he said, leaving with Debs, citing the needed to buy something. After they left, Paul explained that someone else was watching Shawn, someone who is also interested in justice, at least as far as Shawn is concerned. I wanted to know more, but Paul only said that this man could neither punish him personally nor find the money to arrange for his removal. If you decide to, deal with him, then this man will sort everything out, Paul said with some strange insistence. Why is he so insistent on this? What's in it for him? One thing was clear. This meant something to him. Yes, stop putting pressure on me, I told him. You know me, I don't give in to pressure from others, especially after everything I've been through. I looked at him intently, not hiding my irritation. Okay, he said, raising his hand. I won't mention it again. Will you put a kettle there? I nodded and turned the kettle for another mug of coffee, smiling at his subtle change of topic. When I sat down again, I had nothing to say. Paul didn't offer anything either, and we sat there for about 10 minutes until I gave up. Okay, I'll talk about it, but don't try to force me to do something I'll regret later. He'll be out today if he hasn't already, he said. You know he's after you, and... He was interrupted by the doorbell. I went to open it. It was a policeman. He wished me good morning and introduced himself as Sergeant McBride. I was puzzled. I had agreed to come to the site after lunch. Why this premature foray? In response to my question, he offered to talk inside, so I invited him to enter. We went into the kitchen, and I found it empty. Looks like Paul left out the back door. Knowing that he preferred to minimize contact with the police, I did not mention that anyone was here. Sergeant McBride began questioning me about my whereabouts and seemed disappointed that I would be able to prove my alibi for the previous night. It turns out that a certain car was vandalized and stolen, and I was the main suspect. Unfortunately for the sergeant, I was still in the hospital when the car was discovered. Fortunately for me, laughing at other people's misfortunes is not yet considered a crime, just like offering to drink to the health of the culprits if they are found. Shortly after he left, Debs and Jack returned from their shopping trip. When I mentioned that the police were coming, I thought I saw a slight guilty smile on Jack's face, but he didn't say anything. After coffee, I sent him off by reminding him that I wouldn't be working on Monday. After he left, I set about installing a security door on the side of the house in case Shawn and his friends tried again. All too soon, Monday arrived, and we headed to court at 9:30, bracing ourselves for another long wait. They explained to me again why this investigative process was needed. Since the death was violent, it had to be decided whether it was accidental or not. That's all. The circumstances didn't matter. Most hearings are purely formalities, with 1 or 3 people, sometimes a jury, making a decision. If it is determined that the death was not accidental, then and only then will the CPS decide whether charges will be laid. Nonsense, in my opinion. He's dead, and I'm not. If he hadn't broken into my house, he would have been alive. Why does anyone even care? When a person is hit by a train, no one blames the driver. They blame the idiot who ended up on the tracks. Who cares? The dead man is still dead only because he was somewhere he shouldn't have been. The hearing we attended did not begin until after lunch. Testimonies were read from Debs, mine, the woman, Mark, Debs, me, and the coroner. The person reading the testimony did so in a monotone voice that almost put me in a trance. I heard every word, but each sentence overlapped with the next, and nothing stuck in my memory. I began to look around the room and suddenly noticed that someone was looking at me. First, I noticed the eyes wide, red and full of hatred. Tears glistened on her wrinkled face. Her dark hair with dense curls was already beginning to turn gray. She saw me looking at her and didn't look away. I could almost feel the hail of bullets from her imaginary AK-47 aimed at me in her head. I assumed it was Winston's mother. Yes, I understood her. To some extent justified hatred. But, I'm not the one who raised a rapist and a bandit. I was called to answer a few questions to clarify some points from my statement. After I swore to tell the truth, and only the truth, the interrogation began. I was unexpectedly grateful for the few conversations I had with Sandra. How did Mr. White end up at the bottom of the stairs? I helped him. I pushed him down. Why did you do this? He had a gun to my wife's head and intended to hurt her. At that time, it was the only way out of a difficult situation. You claim that you helped him fall. In your statement, you say that you pulled him back, causing him to fall. Did you intend to kill him? The only thing I wanted at that moment was to get out of there and keep myself and my wife safe. What made you think he was going to attack your wife? He told me in detail what he and his friends were going to do. Is this about Mrs. Lucy McGarrett and Mr. Mark King? Yes, and he also said that others would be coming soon. I looked again at the woman I thought was Winston's mother. For the first time since I noticed her, she looked away, her head dropped, and she began to look at the floor. Was it shameful? I thought about it. Why did you only act at the top of the stairs and not before? Because at that point he pushed her and the weapon was no longer pointed directly at her head. Did you fall down the stairs? No, I exclaimed. He had a gun and I grabbed Debs and ran. According to the coroner's report, the cause of death was a broken neck, most likely due to the weight of the person falling on his chest, as evidenced by these bruises. How do you explain that it looks like you jumped on his chest? I panicked. I knew I had jumped onto his chest. I heard the crunch of his neck as my feet landed on his body. I realized that this was the most important answer in the whole matter and that I needed to convince them of the lie. I, tried to jump over him, but holding my wife, I could not overcome the required distance. Is that so? It's me. I let my voice trail off. So you weren't planning on landing on his chest? No, of course not. We needed to escape. That's all, Mr. Jones. Thank you. I left the witness stand and sat down next to Debs. Now Winston's mother avoided looking in my direction, for which I was grateful. As time drew to a close, I noticed the judge looking at his watch. Looks like there will be another day of hearings. She called a break at 3:30 p.m. The next day, I was relieved to see that the woman I thought was Winston's mother had not appeared. Unfortunately, Shawn was there. Debs turned white when he entered. He looked at us, then walked over and sat down in the same place where Winston's mother had sat the day before. It was a message, a threat, and I understood it. Relief gave way to anxiety. He kept looking at us and grinning. The hearing had barely resumed when it ended. It took a little over an hour, summing up the results and rendering a verdict an accident. I assumed that the decision had been made in advance. Although I was reassured by the verdict, Shawn's presence was unsettling. Debs clung to me like her life depended on it. We went straight from court to Lawrence, my lawyer, to apply for a restraining order. While we sat waiting for the reception, I made a decision. After we laid out the situation, Lawrence gave Debs and I a standard form to fill out and sent it to the court, saying that the case should be heard by the end of the day or within 24 hours maximum. However, the order will not take effect until Shawn is notified, and only then will he be arrested if he violates its terms. Debs was not happy. She said she wasn't ready to face people again after what happened Friday. I reminded her that she had already returned to work and that her day off was only related to the trial. Tomorrow she will go to work again. I looked into her eyes. I saw how frightened she was by this thought, and at that moment I realized she was. I tried to calm her down by telling her that the restraining order would take effect tomorrow afternoon. She began to tremble. I thought about giving in and letting her take a few more days off, but we both knew it wouldn't be right. We needed to fight, and we both needed to get back to our normal lives. I felt anger rising within me again. I wanted to hurt him deeply. I clenched my fist, feeling my anger rising, my blood pulsing in my veins, my breathing becoming heavy. If he were here, I would strangle him and would have to be killed to stop him. But suddenly the anger disappeared. I was calm again, only the sweat on my forehead betrayed my condition. I took out my phone and called Pete. We talked a little, and he agreed that one of him and Dave would accompany Debs to her car. He then laughed and said that he had sent Mr. Derby a parking bill. He billed him pound 300 for every 12 hours or part thereof, so he wouldn't want to do it again. He added that this would be more than enough to cover Deb's salary for her absence. I laughed with him, and after saying goodbye, I told Debs about it. Her mood improved noticeably. She insisted on stopping at the supermarket to buy food for dinner. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but I thought I spotted Shawn a couple of times. Once in the parking lot, the second inside the store. Both times I felt not anger, but pure hatred and a strong determination to make him pay. I didn't say anything to Debs. If she saw him, she also remained silent. When we got home, Debs busied herself with housework and preparing dinner while I settled in front of the TV. I don't think I fell asleep, but I was half asleep, lying on the couch with my eyes closed, listening to the news. My head went through possible scenarios. Hire someone through Paul's friend or get the satisfaction myself. When I heard about the robbery and shooting on the news, I remembered a client I worked with a couple of months ago, Jono. He was a typical biker, a big Harley Davidson, long hair and a beard. I was working on his roof finishing cement work when he called me for a cup of tea. We talked about this and that until the postman came. Jono received a speeding ticket after being caught on camera on the A1 near Grantham. He was furious. Most cameras capture numbers on the front to identify the driver, making motorcycles less vulnerable. But there were several cameras filming from behind, and he was caught by one of them. Then it dawned on me, an alibi. This episode popped into my an idea. I was now fully awake and mentally running through possible plans that could put an end to the problems with Shawn once and for all. I knew little about him, except that he considered himself the navel of the earth and loved to demonstrate his ego. But maybe in less than an hour, I came up with a basic plan that wouldn't cost me too much, especially if I could find an old phone with a prepaid SIM card. I started looking for it in drawers and closets without telling Debs. When I searched the house, I moved to the garage. In the end, I found the phone in a box that I was going to throw away years ago. There were things there that should have been thrown in the trash long ago. While packing the box back, I came across one more thing. As soon as I touched it, I felt my brain begin to connect new dots. These were dark and unpleasant thoughts, but they made me smile. The phone was completely discharged, and there was no charger nearby. However, earlier, in one of the drawers, I found replacement connectors for the car charger, so charging it in the van was not a problem. Now all that was left was to get Deb's phone and check if she had deleted Shawn's number. Today luck was clearly on my side. Her bag was on a chair in the living room. I took the phone and went into the garage with it. I started looking in her contacts. Shawn, handsome, lover, SD, Derby, nothing. Then I decided to look through the call log. And so, last Sunday, she received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was definitely him. I still want you. When will we meet? Her answer, never. Leave me alone. His answer, you want me, I know it. Her, fuck off. His, right when you change your mind. And then another, you will change your mind. She didn't respond to the last message. I wrote the number down on the back of a pack of cigarettes, deleted the messages and blocked the number, then returned the phone to my bag. I felt better than I had in months. So much better that he showed Debs his mood during the night 3 times. It was a big moment in our relationship. That night, for the first time, I did something for her that I hadn't done since the last time she tied me down. The next day at work, I charged my old phone in my van. He still had £3.40 in his balance, more than enough for my purposes. At lunch, sitting in the van and eating sandwiches, I asked Jack a question about his neighbor, whom he hated. Carter of this? Does he still have that golf? That asshole is not my friend, but yeah, so what? He answered. I ignored his question and asked, does he still go away on his Vespa on weekends? Yes, I think he has an overnight event in Yarmouth this weekend. And what? Do they still do these? Yes, but why do you need to know this? Do you still communicate with your former friends? I asked. No. I knew he was lying. Jack, I insisted. Okay, just one. And only to buy something from him, he admitted with a feeling of guilt. I knew what this something was, but chose not to develop the topic. So, if this golf disappears, say, on Saturday afternoon, its absence is unlikely to be noticed before late Sunday morning. A wide smile appeared on his face. What are you planning? I ignored his question again. If she goes missing, can she be taken to the old barn in Lower Lane and hidden inside? I asked. I see no reason why not. Would a thief agree to attach this to the passenger seat? I handed him the object I found in the box. He nodded. The thief must know that this thing is broken and cannot be used. Let him attach it only after he finishes playing. It should be finished and left until 7:30. I can't believe you, Mr. Good Boy, are even thinking about this, Jack grinned. Are we going to work today or what? I said, getting out of the van. Paul and Jack were waiting for me when I walked into the bar. It was full of people, it was darts night. I checked in on their drinks before heading to the bar and grabbing 3 pints. Then he went to Jack. Although everyone wanted to discuss the obvious topic, we avoided it until we went outside to smoke. It was raining, and we took shelter in Paul's car. I asked him for a favor. He agreed, but seemed a little upset when I said I wasn't going to use his friend's services. Then I pulled out an old map and showed him exactly where some things were. Having settled everything, I went home and returned before 10. Debs was lying on the couch, curled up and watching TV. She sat down to give me a place next to her and lay down again, resting her head on my lap. We fell asleep in this position. I woke up at dawn to find my head stuck between her buttocks and the back of the sofa. When I sat down, she moved too. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I realized that we had almost lost it. I woke her up and we went to the bedroom. Taking off my clothes and crawling under the blanket, I pulled her towards me and we quickly fell asleep. The next morning, while I was waiting for Jack, I sent a text from my old phone. New number, D. I was shocked when I immediately received the answer. I knew you wanted me. Smug bastard. Maybe this will work, I thought and replied. Do you still want to play? You or plus husband? Plus husband. You're home. I can't. Damn, I forgot he's married. After thinking for a minute, I wrote, I'll rent a room and pick you up. Where? At your place. At 9 on Saturday. A couple of minutes later, I received an answer. My phone vibrated in my pocket as I drove from Jack's to work. We had coffee in the cabin before starting to work. I read his message. Okay, see you then. I smiled, turned off the phone, and hid it in my jacket pocket. Turning to Jack, I said, Tell Paul I'll meet him at 8 on Saturday, and make sure you have proof that you were there all night. I pulled into a secluded off-ramp, a well-known meeting place, and parked behind the only car parked there. I later heard that the parking lot would be full of cars, but it was too early. I handed the bag I had taken with me to Paul's car and discussed the final details with him. At 8:30, he was already driving towards a 1 in my van. For about 10 years, he must have been south of Grantham. I drove to the old barn and changed cars again. About 20 minutes to 9, I waited in the street near Mr. Derby's house. At 5 minutes to 9, I saw him leave the house and head towards the road. He looked around and at his watch several times until I flashed my headlights. He looked in my direction, then looked around again and nodded before moving towards me. He approached the Golf and, seeing that I was alone, was clearly unhappy. Opening the passenger door, he leaned over and asked angrily through clenched teeth, "What the hell is going on? Where's your easy-to-get girlfriend?" I could hardly restrain myself from attacking him. "She wants you." "He talks about you all the time," I began, trying to sound humiliated, as if I had resigned myself to my fate. "But I don't trust you, and I don't want to see you at our house. Besides, if you show up there, you might be arrested." "You're right, I didn't think about that," he replied. "Are you sitting down or what?" I asked. He got into the car, but not before looking around again. Maybe he wasn't as foolish as I thought. Having fastened his seatbelt, he sat down, and I set off. As I expected, another car standing nearby turned on its headlights and moved behind us at a distance of about 100 meters. I turned right, then right again, and the car still followed me. Having made another turn, I stopped again in front of his house. "Okay, get out," I ordered. He did not move and asked, "What's happening?" I shouted. "You know perfectly well what's going on. To hell with you, you can take her as soon as we get divorced." "Okay, you found me out," he replied, and then asked, "What if I told my friend to stop?" "No," I answered, noting that there seemed to be only one person in the car. "You can save your marriage," he continued, trying to sound convincing. I lowered my head to hide my grin. Without saying anything, I simply nodded. I heard him take out his phone and dial a number. "Forget it," he said. I didn't hear the answer, but I was pleased that he said the name. It really was Mark. "No, leave it for today." Another unintelligible answer. "I'll try, but I don't promise anything. See you tomorrow." He hung up and I extended my hand. "Give me your phone." He looked at me in bewilderment, but still handed over the device. I turned it off and put it in my pocket. Mark's car drove off and I followed. At the intersection, he turned one way and I turned the other. I drove for a while, randomly changing directions, keeping a close eye on the rearview mirror. Having made sure that I was not being followed, I headed towards the old barn. As I pulled up, I saw Paul's car in the headlights. Derby began to get nervous. "This is not your car. What's happening?" "Well, Shawn, buddy, you think you can play with people's lives and get away with it. It turns out you're really dumb as hell." In the darkness, I couldn't see his face, but I imagined it glowing with anger. I got out of the car, hearing him fiddling with his seat belt. I walked over to Paul's car and took a gas burner out of the trunk. Opening the Golf door, I lit it and stepped back. "What are you doing?" he asked. I don't know whether it was because of the light of the flame or fear, but his face became deathly pale. "Don't waste time on the seat belt, it's broken. You'll need a screwdriver or something similar." "You're stuck here for now," I said calmly. "You damn bastard, I'll get to you. You and your prostitute will pay for this," he yelled. I brought the flame closer to his face, and he raised his hands in defense. Then I lowered the torch to his groin. He screamed in pain, but was able to fight it off. I repeated this process several times, hearing him scream and threaten until he finally lost consciousness. I turned off the burner and let it cool, then replaced it with a can of gasoline. I poured a gallon of gas on the car, inside and out, then got Paul's car ready to leave. I thought for a moment, realizing what I had done and what I was about to do. I was overcome with doubts. My hands shook, either from shock or from fear. I tried to pull myself together, but I couldn't stop shaking. I looked at Shawn's phone, trying to turn it on so I could call an ambulance. But my fingers wouldn't obey. At that moment, I heard him groan as he regained consciousness. After a minute, he began to understand what was happening and spoke again. But this time, instead of threatening me, he threatened me legally. I still tried to deal with the phone, but it was no use. To calm down, I took out a cigarette and lit it with my lighter. Taking a deep drag, I closed the lid, and suddenly the lighter fell from my trembling fingers. She fell to the floor, straight into the stream of gasoline. I saw the fire begin to spread through the gasoline. If I had noticed it right away, I could have put it out with my foot. But I froze, realizing that control over the situation was slipping away. I picked up the lighter, already feeling the rush of adrenaline. The shaking stopped, but it was too late. The fire was approaching the car. A flash engulfed the body. Shawn began to scream and squirm, but the seat belt held him in place. I looked at the flames, realizing that there was nothing I could do. Even if I called for help, it was too late. He was doomed. I needed to run. I understood that if I stayed, I could set others up. I couldn't let them suffer because of me. I jumped into Paul's car and drove away. 2 years have passed. I don't think anyone really believed that I had anything to do with Shawn's death, but my simple alibi was enough. Since then, Debs has never cheated again. Strangely, no one even tried to flirt with her anymore. Perhaps this had a meaning. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.